And they have the cheek to complain when we're delivering the biggest nuclear building programme in half a century, delivered by the Labour government. Now, I should welcome the fact, I will in a minute, I should welcome the fact that the Honourable Lady supports our nuclear regulation bill. I'm bound to ask, why didn't they do it? I mean, was it incompetence, idleness, ideology, combination of all three? But I do, my friend, the Honourable Member for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, he always has a great quote that you can read out. This is what he said following the last general election. After 14 years of Conservative government, he said, we are now in a position where it's more difficult to build critical infrastructure than it was when we came to power. It is a Labour government clearing up their mess, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to give way. Yeah, I'm going to give way.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. Including in that list of achievements is the £12 billion deal signed last year in September to bring new nuclear to Hartlepool, making Hartlepool one of the biggest clean energy economies in this country. Does he agree, as we secure energy security, we must also secure economic security for those parts of the country left behind?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and this is what's so exciting, Madam Deputy Speaker. Contrary to what the Shadow Energy Secretary said, we're seeing a renaissance of nuclear in this country, and not just through the Rolls-Royce programme. We're very pleased to do the signing of the Rolls-Royce the agreement with Rolls-Royce very recently with the Chancellor, but also other routes to market. And we are very, very encouraging of both the efforts of my honourable friend and others. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman because he and I go back a long way.
We go back a long way, and we agree actually about the crisis of capitalism in terms of the sacrifice of domestic production for imports. He and I would have a lot in common on that. And he will understand that the economic uncertainty he described and the need for greater national economic resilience applies to food too. So accepting that we should put solar on buildings, we should have offshore wind, surely he understands that by putting solar plants at scale on the most productive farmland needed to deliver food security, his argument about economic resilience falls flat. So will he just look again at that? There is a middle way. We do go back a long way. Let's, for heaven's sake, compromise.
Well, we may agree on some things, but not on this. Look, let me just say to him, because I do have great respect for him, on solar, even on the most ambitious plans for solar, it's less than 1% of agricultural land, something like 0.6% or so of agricultural land. And I do say to the... let me just make this point. I do say to the party opposite, there is something somewhat irrational that in relation to nuclear, they want to be builders, not blockers, but in relation to everything else, they want to be blockers, not builders. Because if you support the nuclear power plant, well, you've got to support the grid to connect the nuclear power plant to the grid. If you want to get away from our dependence, and he says he does, from our dependence on international fossil fuel markets, you need to support the cheapest, cleanest form of power, which is solar power. And this is just simply what an array of choices. I give way to the Honourable.
As one who wants to see nuclear power in Northern Ireland, but unfortunately that's down to the Northern Ireland Assembly, and it looks like there might be obstacles to that. But I do wish to see and welcome the Secretary of State's commitment in relation to the tidal, the battery storage and green hydrogen. The Secretary of State has always been very keen to ensure that Northern Ireland can also be part of this growth that's coming from here. Can the Minister perhaps give us some encouragement for Northern Ireland when it comes to green energy and moving forward, that we are part of that plan for this United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
Well, I'm always happy to work with the honourable gentleman for whom I have great respect, and so my team of ministers. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. We heard the Shadow Secretary of State didn't take my second intervention when I was attempting to get an answer from her, but we know that the party opposite proposes to get rid of the energy prices levy, costing the government about £12 billion. We know that it wants to get rid of VAT, costing about £5 or £6 billion. And we know it has a plan for oil or gas, which might be here in 4 or 10 years' time, which is owned by somebody else, and it believes it will use the collection of these different policies to reduce people's energy prices. Has my right honourable friend seen any credibility to the plans from the party opposite that he can share with us? We haven't heard it from them.
Well, my honourable friend makes the point incredibly. My honourable friend makes the point incredibly well, and I do want to say something about the renewables, and then I will move on. the Right Honourable Lady, at the time of the AR7 auction, said we should cancel the auction. Now, as I said, that was an auction that secured power for the equivalent of 16 million homes, including, well, just if they listen for a second, including offshore wind at prices 40% cheaper to build and operate than new gas. Now, she said at the time, she shouted out at the time from a sedentary position that the price of, and I quote, gas is falling as a justification for her position. She did say that. Today, the gas price is around 50% higher than it was then. Now, there's a really important point here, which is there can be no clearer demonstration of the gamble they wanted us to take. What a terrible call. What a foolish position. Because we are at the time of the greatest geopolitical instability in generations, and anyone who would rationally learn the lessons of when Russia invaded Ukraine says we cannot gamble on low fossil fuel prices, because this is what happens. By contrast, Madam Deputy Speaker, we stand, I'm going to make some progress, we stand for national security through energy security and energy independence. I want to come on to how we protect consumers, because this is a very important point, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, showed at the budget last year that she took decisions to raise taxes, including on the wealthiest, so we could cut bills for everyone, and we saw that happen in April. I do want to come on to the point that my honourable friend made, though, because this gracious speech also includes legislation to raise the rate of the electricity generator levy from 45% to 55% as part of our plan to break the link between electricity and gas prices and act on the excess profits that arise from that link. And we are also making a big call, which is keeping in place the windfall tax on oil and gas profits during this conflict. Now, in the last few weeks, we've seen profits from major oil and gas companies soar. These are unearned profits as a result... No, I'm not going to give way. No, I'm not going to give way. These are unearned profits as a result of the war. Now, we say, if I can just make a bit of progress, we say tax those profits to help the British people. No, I'm not giving way. I'm not giving way. Now, the energy profits levy has raised £12 billion since it was introduced in 2022. I'm not giving way. No. In the words of the right honourable member for Richmond and Northallerton, the former Prime Minister, he was then the Chancellor. And this is not my words. This is not Red Ed. It's Red Rishi, Madam Deputy Speaker. The oil and gas sector is making extraordinary profits, not as the result of recent changes to risk-taking or innovation or efficiency, but as a result of surging commodity prices. He was right. No, I'm not giving way, just if he listens. But at this moment, what has the official opposition, alongside the SNP, decided to call for the government to dump the policy? So let's just get this straight. At the precise moment that the British people struggle with the effects of the war, they say the priority for scarce resources is to cut taxes for the largest oil and gas companies making record profits. And let's be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, no amount of false accounting or fuzzy maths can hide the fact that the idea that cutting these taxes at this moment of windfall profits will improve revenue. I will give way to the Honourable.
Secretary of State for giving way. Just so no one is under any false interpretation of what this tax does and how it works, does the Secretary of State understand that this tax does not apply to trading nor overseas production? It's on production from the North Sea, which is not where those profits are being made, are they? No.
But the Honourable Lady doesn't obviously understand that prices are going up, including from the North Sea. And let's just go to the amount this raises. According to the OBR, even before this crisis, the windfall tax was forecast to raise £5 billion by September 2027. So the Conservative Party, the official opposition, are going to have to explain, where's the money going to come from then? They're going to cut this tax, £5 billion, cutting taxes for the biggest oil and gas companies. Now, by contrast, we believe you should tax fairly and use the resources to help the British people. And I do want to. I'm not going to wait. I need to finish soon. So, on the energy independence bill, we're going to help legislate to deliver the biggest investment in home upgrades in British history through our £15 billion Warm Homes plan. And as part of this, we'll act to help private renters. And this is important, because this is about how do we make sure that in the drive to clean power, we help everybody in our society. And it's a scandal, Madam Deputy Speaker, that 1.6 million children living in private rented homes are suffering from cold, damp or mould, according to citizens' advice. We say it's time to act. Now, minimum energy efficiency standards for renters was promised by the previous government, then scrapped, and the Energy Independence Bill will legislate for them, cutting bills for renters, lifting 400,000 families out of fuel poverty by 2030. And as part of this, and it goes to the question, he's no longer there, but the honourable gentleman asked me, we also believe that this drive for energy independence can deliver for workers and communities. We're already seeing the jobs clean energy is creating across the country. 11,000 more workers in nuclear, according to the industry's estimates. 8,000 more in offshore wind. Thousands more upgrading the grid on the way to 400,000 extra clean energy jobs by 2030. 90 billion of private investment announced since the election. And we also want to ensure that those... I'm not going to give away. We also want to ensure that those jobs are good jobs. And so we will amend employment legislation as part of the EIB to enable us to bring the rights of offshore renewables workers in line with those working in oil and gas. And I do also say that it's by driving forward in clean energy that we can have the best chance of a fair transition in the North Sea. 70,000 jobs were lost in less than a decade under the last government. We're determined to lead the world in industries such as offshore wind, hydrogen and carbon capture, and we will continue to use the North Sea and oil and gas for decades to come by keeping existing fields open for their lifetime. That's why the Energy Independence Bill will legislate to introduce transitional energy certificates, as welcomed by industry, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would also say to the reform benches that we also look forward to the debate in the EIB on their plans for fracking, because fracking will make no difference to bills, it's dangerous and it's roundly opposed by local communities, and we will act. Let me close by saying this, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is the approach to energy security. I will give way, yeah.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Part of my constituency is in Lancashire, where we did see fracking testing and we suffered earth tremors because of that. Does he agree with me that the British people do not want fracking in our communities and do not want to see the risks that we saw in Lancashire?
Well, I have to say there is something quite ironic, my old friend puts it well, which is that Reform nationally say they want fracking, and then their representatives in Scarborough and Lancashire seem to say they're against it. And we're going to be asking from now to the general election where Reform candidates stand with the local community or the fracking industry. No. So this is the approach to energy security that underpins this gracious speech. Above all, we will learn the lessons of the fossil fuel crises of our age. We will build our energy independence, tackle the affordability crisis, deliver good jobs and investment in our communities, and make the right decisions, Madam Deputy Speaker, for today's and future generations. And I commend the gracious speech to the House.
Before I call the Lib Dem spokesperson, I think it would be helpful to everybody to know there will be an immediate 5-minute time limit after she has spoken. Pippa Halings.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And oil and gas prices have a long history of spiking and damaging our economy. The UK was among the worst hit in Western Europe by the price shock following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So as long as we remain tied to volatile international fossil fuel markets, then dictators and foreign wars will have a grip on our economy and on the pockets of families and pensioners across this country. So surely it is time to wake up to that reality and learn the lessons of the past. And that is why we Liberal Democrats do welcome the government bringing forward a bill on energy independence. We will scrutinise it carefully to ensure that the urgent and ambitious measures necessary for the energy transition are there, bringing down energy bills, ensuring energy security, but also a fair, managed and prosperous transition to clean energy. Madam Deputy Speaker, as households nervously await the announcement of the energy price cap next week, with forecasts showing households could be hit with a £300 Trump war tax on energy bills, we Liberal Democrats are clear that the best way to get down energy bills is through home-grown renewable power with prices we control. I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. I know the Lib Dems are a big fan of localism. This isn't a dig, by the way. In my constituency of Harlow, we've got a primary school, Church Langley Primary School, that has led the way when it comes to solar panels on their roof, and they're actually able to generate all the energy they need from those solar panels. So would she welcome the work that this government are doing to ensure that other schools can benefit from the same sort of system?
I definitely welcome that, and as you will see in my speech, we want to go even further on that. And as we know, it is Liberal Democrats that fix people's church roofs and put the solar panels on there, so we will too. But for too long, the pace of change has been too slow, and it's left people and businesses trapped and at the mercy of a broken energy system, which they're literally paying the price for. So it's time to take back control of our energy future. And that does start with our communities. And in the last session of Parliament, I welcome the government agreeing with our calls to include community energy and community benefits in the GB Energy Act. But now communities must be given the right to sell and buy energy locally. And we must mandate community benefit requirements where communities host renewable infrastructure, the transition that is done with them, not to them. And I also welcome the adoption of the Sunshine Bill introduced by my honourable friend, the member for Cheltenham, requiring solar panels on all new homes. But why wait until 2027? And why not go further? We Liberal Democrats want to see solar on new warehouses and car parks, turning rooftops across the country into sources of clean, affordable power. And we also want to see solar panels on schools and hospitals. Since 2019, energy bills for schools and the NHS have more than doubled, forcing impossible choices between heating and healthcare or between bills over books. So the current government investment reaches less than 1% of schools. So Liberal Democrats would go further and faster, helping protect frontline budgets for our schools and hospitals. Families too want to do the right thing, and there's been a record increase in the sales of solar panels and heat pumps since the start of the war in Iran. We must build on this momentum, help households and small businesses take back control of their bills, giving access, we say, to zero or low interest loans for upgrading properties by establishing an energy security bank to support electrification. However, at the same time, we do need to fix the broken energy market. It remains absurd that electricity is still priced so highly compared with gas. And that means that people are often not rewarded for electrifying their homes and businesses. And it's also crazy that consumers are paying billions to switch off our wind turbines when the grid cannot cope with surplus renewable generation. And that is why I welcome the recent steps taken to begin breaking the link between gas and electricity prices, a reform long called for by the Liberal Democrats. But we urge government to go further and faster in this bill, moving unfair policy levies off electricity bills, providing a progressive social energy tariff for those unable to absorb these repeated bill shocks, upgrading grid infrastructure, and ensuring that customers directly benefit from cheaper renewable power through flexibility when there's surplus renewable generation. Yes, we need energy independence, but that doesn't mean isolation. So the UK and the EU have deeply interconnected energy systems, but the damaging Brexit deal has meant a huge increase in energy costs. Our future lies ever closer energy ties to our nearest neighbours. And this government needs to drop its red lines on Europe. Rejoining the EU internal electricity market and linking our emissions trading schemes will reduce costs and strengthen resilience. Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston Surbiton, was right to say that it is fantasy and fabrication for some in this House to pretend that there is a solution in the North Sea to people's high energy bills. Even when North Sea production was at its peak nearly 30 years ago, the UK was still exposed to global price shocks because we have been price takers. Nor is the answer fracking, as some are calling for, destroying our countryside and polluting our waterways. We will push for a complete ban on fracking and have complete clarity on closing all of the loopholes. We do need a secure energy mix. That includes nuclear. And we do believe that small modular reactors have great potential to strengthen energy security alongside renewables. Oil and gas will also be part of that energy mix for decades to come. But we must recognise the need for a fair and managed energy transition, given that our remaining reserves are in decline. Communities cannot be left behind. So we urge the government to establish a Just Transition Commission, future-proof supply chain jobs, and enable the retention of our brilliant skilled oil and gas workers into high-quality jobs in renewables and other sectors.
Give way on that.
I will give way.
Thank you. Does the Honourable Lady agree that new licences in the North Sea would help protect the workforce and the supply chain in order to help with the transition to new energies?
I think research has shown that the hundreds of new oil and gas licences awarded by the government between 2010 and 2024 has resulted in just about 6 days of extra gas. What we need to look at are the jobs that can move into. I think there were 75,000 jobs that were lost without any cries and outcries from the government before. We are looking at a just energy transition that really does help those high-skilled workers into business.
On that point.
I'll just keep going. Madam Deputy Speaker, what proponents of prolonged over-reliance on fossil fuels often ignore is the costs of inaction. There is overwhelming scientific consensus that transitioning away from fossil fuels is essential for our efforts to tackle climate change. Communities around the country are already feeling the impacts and costs of extreme weather events. My constituency of South Cambridgeshire is one of the most water-stressed in the country, and last month we saw 5% of annual rainfall, and we're feeling it. Floods and droughts have battered farmers across the country. They're reeling from the worst harvest on record, and that will lead to problems with food security and will put up our food prices. And one avoidable death is one too many for the elderly and vulnerable during recurrent heat waves. Nor does anyone want ravaging wildfires ripping through our most treasured woodlands and national parks. As the government's suppressed national security assessment on global biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse laid bare, the destruction of nature threatens the UK's resilience, prosperity and national security. People want to know the truth. In my constituency of South Cambridgeshire and across the country, people's emergency briefings are happening. People are taking control. They want to know and be better prepared. And that's why we must also look to prepare for the climate shocks we can't avoid. And that's why we reject the government's false dichotomy between climate and nature, saying that nature is a blocker to growth. We have to be better prepared. We have to overcome the silos between energy, climate and nature. We need to promote nature-based approaches to both capture carbon as well as to adapt, storing water, regenerating our soil, cooling buildings and protecting people's homes from being uninsurable. Madam Deputy Speaker, a secure future for our country depends on our energy independence, restored nature and resilient communities, meeting our responsibility to our children and young people for a healthier future for generations to come. Thank you.
Chair of the Select Committee, Bill Esterson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the Select Committee has taken evidence on much of what is in the gracious speech, and a big part of the debate today has been about the threat that we face as a result of the second fossil fuel crisis within 5 years. I remember the first one in 1973, Candles on the Table, was fun as a 6-year-old, not much fun for most of the country, and we've repeated that experience multiple times ever since. But in order to address the challenge of the fossil fuel crisis we're going through at the moment, the government, we've had one piece of evidence again and again and again at committee, and it's that the government must bring down the cost of electricity to enable the transition away from our dependence on oil and gas. I'm not going to... I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Would my honourable friend, to support your argument about the price of electricity, the renewable energies is largely generated in Scotland, North Wales, South West England. We have the highest level of fuel poverty. We have no mains gas, and the suffering caused to those rural areas is remarkable. And I think until that is impacted or improved, we're not in a position to move to an electricity-based economy. Thank you.
I'm grateful to him. Of course, the government was very supportive of heating oil with measures that were announced recently for precisely some of the reasons he's set out. But we have to address this threat, and we have to transition for reasons of energy security and for reasons of cost and bringing bills down as well. Anybody who's going to the pump now, anybody who's looking at what their bills are likely to be, I think Martin Lewis was predicting the latest increase in the price cap just today, can see what is coming for domestic and business consumers. And in terms of energy security, Ukraine has learned the hard way and shown us all through the Russian attacks on its oil and gas installations. We've seen the same in the Middle East with the war with Iran. And decentralising and moving away from a dependence on oil and gas is key when it comes to protecting energy generation. And the economic arguments are very, very strong. The Right Honourable Lady was talking about growth earlier. And I just say to her that just look at what the OBR is saying. The OBR makes the point that the costs of not addressing climate change are significantly more than the costs of making the transition. The Climate Change Committee predicts that if we don't act, we will see a fall in GDP of 7% by 2050. And if we really want to be scared, listen to the actuaries. And actuaries do know a thing or two about this. They predict a global GDP fall between 2070 and 2090 of 50%, with catastrophic consequences across the world, unless we take the action we need to now. So we have to act. And then to the North Sea. It is a super mature basin. There is a fraction left of what there was there to start. We were in a hurry to extract from the North Sea. Peak North Sea was 1999, 4.5 million barrels of oil a day. By 2023, after 13 of their 14 years in office, it had fallen to 1.23 million. That is a quarter of its peak production, and it will halve again by 2030. And as NISO says, new licences won't make a material difference to capacity or production. Jackdaw would only provide 2% of UK demand if it is given consent, and Rosebank would only account for 7% of production by 2030 of 2030 levels. It doesn't stop the decline; it only slows it. I will give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way at last. I finally got to my feet. And I'm surprised that I wasn't allowed to intervene earlier, because I agree with much of what's being said, especially from the Secretary of State when it comes to renewables and acorn. But I have a question for the honourable member. Would he agree that granting a licence for jackdaw would be much more environmentally friendly than importing LPG from Qatar or from the USA?
Here, here, here.
Well, it's as I previously had said, the amount is very, very small compared to the needs of the UK. I think there are. He might not be so disappointed in what I say next. I think there is an argument, and the government has done some of this with tiebacks, for continuing to support production in the North Sea, because the same supply chains that are responsible for our oil and gas industry are going to be critical for the development of the renewable generation that goes on in the North Sea and more widely. And many of those workers, and some of them have already moved into sectors like nuclear. So I think it is key, and it's really, really important that the agreement with the TUC on the Clean Jobs Plan is pursued. And I welcome what the Secretary of State announced before about rights in the North Sea for renewables. I think it is key that we enable that transition, that we give a future, a well-paid future, to people working in oil and gas now. Madam Deputy Speaker, the opportunities for security that I've talked about, an increased generation and electrification will reduce that reliance on imports of oil and gas. What the Secretary of State referred to, what's hopefully in the bill, about optimising the grid, will only help with that process too. The government has already addressed via NISO the connection queue, which is being cleared already, and giving people access to excess renewables, being able to sell back to the grid, and encouraging businesses to make greater use of flexibility can only help give people access now to cheaper energy. So the economics of this really add up as well. The clean energy economy is growing 3 times faster than the rest of the economy. It is delivering the jobs that the Secretary of State referred to. It is the Warm Homes Plan, and this will be supported by the Warm Homes Agency, which again has been announced, will deliver people healthier homes to live in. It will deliver better air quality. And what is critical, as I said at the start, is reducing the price of electricity so that people can take advantage of the technology in the Warm Homes Plan. It is already cheaper, according to Auto Trader, to buy a new EV. The second-hand market has been cheaper for some time. And enabling more people to drive electric can only help in that transition and in the reduction in our reliance on oil and gas. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government has to have the confidence to deliver this agenda. It has to have the confidence that it is right that energy independence comes through the move away from oil and gas and towards renewables. And it has to make the case to people that they will benefit from the investment in their homes, in their transport, and more widely. And I very much support and look forward to debating in detail the Energy Independence Bill.
Well done. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Sefton Central, who speaks with great authority and it talks a lot of good sense. I have to say to the benches opposite that changing the Prime Minister will solve nothing. We tried that 4 times, didn't do us any good at all. So this King's speech should have been an opportunity for fundamental reform. And does the government have the courage to do that? And what we suspect on these benches is that it does not. The fact is that for too many years we've concentrated on wealth redistribution rather than wealth creation. And we're getting poorer and poorer and less able to do the things in the public sector that we want to do. But let me start with a more consensual point and welcome the government, and I see the Minister sitting there and I've talked to him about it, welcome the government's commitment to the nuclear fusion site at West Burton, Gainsborough, only 2 miles from the town I represent. Fantastic, cutting-edge technology. Only this morning I received a letter from the Chief Executive. At the heart of STEP fusion is a world-leading technical effort. So those people who say Britain is broken should look at the thousands of jobs we're creating, the millions of pounds worth of investment. And he thanks us. He says the UK is recognised globally for its lead in fusion regulation, having set a proportionate approach comparable to industrial processes through the 2023 Energy Act. So there we are, consensual, working together, cutting-edge technology. We've heard a bit about solar farms. I visited over 30 villages in my constituency, an open churches festival this week, and I went to a village at Fillingham. I saw on Fillingham Aerodrome solar panels being built. Nobody seemed to care. Brown site, 100, 200 acres, but 16,000 acres around Gainsborough, prime agricultural land. I hear what my honourable friend says for South Holland and the Deepings. So just have a moderate approach. You know, I can climb the hill in the Wolds from my cottage, I can look across the North Sea, I can see that we're world leaders in offshore wind. Fair enough, popular. But 16,000 acres of prime agricultural land. All the profits going to entrepreneurs in London and large landowners. Yeah, I give way to the chairman of the Select Committee.
I'm grateful to him what he said before, and I always find his contributions interesting. The Select Committee heard from the Country Land and Business Owners Association on the subject of solar panels on agricultural land. And their evidence to us was clear that it doesn't have the impact that is feared, and that actually it is often beneficial to farmers in providing an alternative revenue stream without affecting their ability to grow crops.
£100,000 a year for owning 100 acres. Yeah. Very good, wonderful incentive. But can you grow? We are the breadbasket of England. Can you grow wheat and barley? Anyway, I don't want to go on about it. We know the arguments. Now, nationalising British Steel. No, we don't take an ideological view of this. I represent a constituency where hundreds of my constituents work in British Steel. Greg Clark ran it for 9 months. He paid all the wages. So I personally, neither for nor opposed to it. But actually just nationalising British Steel won't make a difference when we're paying the highest energy costs in Europe. That's the real problem. So that's the problem that the government needs to address. Nationalisation or not, let's not get bogged down in these arguments. Let's find a private sector buyer. Let's get the workers back into operation, get our blast furnaces moving, and not be over worried about ideologies about the blast furnaces. We want to create British Steel.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and he's making an excellent point in respect of British Steel, where hundreds of my constituents also work. Would you agree that in the short term, nationalisation may be the way forward, but longer term, we need to get private sector investment into the industry? And the way to achieve that is to reduce energy costs, and that is absolutely critical, not just for steel, but for so many of our heavy industries.
Yeah, my honourable friend is so well respected in the area for the fantastic amount of work he's done in Scunthorpe, constantly holding the government to account, working with the government. And we've got to do this together to protect our steel-making capacity for the sake of our industrial wealth. Now, the Energy Independence Bill, I agree it provides a framework for transitioning the UK energy market away from fossil fuels. We all agree with that, towards alternative forms of energy. No problem with that. This is sensible regarding nuclear energy. But the ideological pursuit of renewables is doing harm and is at odds with achieving energy security when we have our own fossil fuel resources in the North Sea. It's not a zero-sum game. I don't see the ideological virtue of simply exporting your carbon emissions, which we're doing too. No, but I've got to make some progress. I do apologise. So again, I would have thought we could have a compromise on that. We could have a policy which is sensible, gradually moving away from fossil fuels, gradually becoming a more green energy economy, but not simply exporting our emissions by setting arbitrary dates. Now, will you forgive me, Madam Deputy Speaker, as this is a debate on the Queen's speech, if I mention another subject in the short time available to me? Now, when you get to my age, you can say unpopular things, because I haven't got much longer anyway. So I've got 2 minutes and the problem with our country is that we're governing by focus groups. And what do focus groups want? They want less tax and, of course, they want better public services. Their debt is already 100% of GDP. Within 50 years, because of the triple lock and other benefit increases, it'll be 170%. Now, of course, the old vote, but they all have children and grandchildren. We do have a responsibility to younger people in our country. They know the present system is unsustainable. So, whilst the average increase of the triple lock measures over the past 13 years, and we brought it in, it was supposed to be a temporary measure, but no party has the courage to change it. The average increase over 13 years has been around 40%. Pensions have gone up over 60%. Nearly £20 billion of annual additional costs so far. This will get bigger every year and more unaffordable. By 2050, the gap is likely to have grown to £120 billion, if not more, to exacerbate the economic crisis. And whoever becomes Prime Minister, they've got to cope with this. It's really important. By that time, there will be 20–25% fewer tax-paying workers for pensioners in Britain, our children and our grandchildren. Of course, we've got to care for old people, particularly old people in poverty, and divert resources to the old people in poverty. But you've got to remember the younger people too. This is entirely unsustainable. So let me finish this point. Yes, we want to keep a triple lock, not the triple lock. We want to have the average of the three indices so it doesn't go up exponentially every year. The government should do the right thing by the nation and bring it in. They should bring it in, make our finances affordable, and my front bench should not oppose them. We should govern in the national interest. We should make our finances sustainable, and then we can really help the people most in need. Thank you.
Toby Perkins.
Very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. His Majesty's gracious speech set out a forward legislative programme for the government, with plans to build our national security, our economic security and energy security. And I welcome this agenda. It's consistent with the manifesto that I and my honourable friends were elected on, and I urge all members of the government to exhibit a relentless focus and urgency on delivery of that programme to ensure that that ambition is matched by its impact. Now, we were elected in 2024 on a mandate of change for national renewal after 14 years of decline under the Tories. And there is a great deal that I could focus on in terms of those achievements if I had more time. But specifically on the National Health Service, on migration, where we saw the recent very positive announcements on the minimum wage increase, on work workers and on renters' rights, this is a government that is delivering against that agenda. And we also saw that despite the prophets of doom on the benches opposite, the most recent figures show once again unemployment continuing to fall and the fastest growth in the G7 in the last quarter. So many of the fundamentals are going in the right direction. But anyone who spent time attempting to persuade voters to vote Labour in the recent elections will have been left in no doubt that our voters remain unconvinced that we are going fast or far enough to bring about the change that they want to see. So I would like to focus on some specific measures within His Majesty's gracious speech that I particularly welcome. Firstly, on the Energy Independence Bill, I very much welcome the government's action to protect households and industry from global instability by powering forward with clean, homegrown energy to create energy independence and get off the fossil fuel roller coaster. Both the Energy Independence Bill and the National Nuclear Regulation Bill will also strengthen our resilience to energy price shocks for the long term and bring down the cost of bills for families. The Ukraine crisis, as we referred to earlier, saw the government of the time pay to subsidise customers' bills because we were so dependent on the global markets. That intervention that government made, that I think politically they had to make because of the impact it would have had on the number of people who would have gone under, cost the British taxpayer £44 billion in a single year. The idea that the response to that further global insecurity of the Iran war is to reduce investment in renewables is quite mad. And so I welcome the government's further legislation on these two bills and absolutely support the increase in nuclear that this government is getting on with after the dither and delay of the previous government. And it was quite remarkable to hear the contribution of the Shadow Secretary of State, who on the one hand said, well, you haven't done enough in 2 years on nuclear. And on the other hand said, well, you can't blame us for the 14 years of inaction because the previous government got in the way a bit. It was just absolutely incoherent. And the exchange of letters between the Shadow Secretary of State, I encourage everyone to look at that, between the Shadow Secretary of State and the Chair of the Climate Change Committee, made absolutely clear that when she voted against the auction 7, she simply did not understand what she was talking about in terms of the difference between ELCO and contracts for difference. So when she says that we should follow her advice on this, we should treat that with the greatest of scepticism. Now, I should also say that I echo the contribution of my honourable friend from Sefton Central on the need to reduce energy bills far more to help with the cost of living, but also to ease the green transition, to benefit consumers and to support industry in this country. Alongside that, we also see in this King's Speech the Clean Water Bill, which, alongside climate action, we do need action on nature. Nature is the foundation of our national economic security, and we cannot tackle climate change without restoring nature. The government made a promise to clean up Britain's rivers and seas, and I'm delighted to see this Clean Water Bill there as part of the King's Speech. Not only tackling the water industry reform, which is crucial, but also recognising the need to tackle agricultural water pollution and road-based water pollution too. I welcome the European Partnership Bill. It's important we work more closely with our European partners, and I fully support what the government is also doing on apprenticeships. Apprenticeships and greater investment in adult education is absolutely crucial if we're going to equip tomorrow's workers with the skills they need to support industry. So there are many measures in this bill that can make a real difference, as well as the need to go further and faster, and I look forward to supporting it again later.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If we are moving into an era of electric cars, thousands of them, and if we are moving into, mostly made in China, of course, and if we are moving into an era of artificial intelligence developed in the United States, then we are going to need infinitely more electricity than the country is capable of producing at present. Madam Deputy Speaker, since the days of the great Walter Marshall, the head of British Nuclear Fuels at one time, I have been a supporter of nuclear energy. And I believe passionately that we have to move much, much faster towards small nuclear reactors if we are going to begin to meet the needs of tomorrow. the needs of our children and our grandchildren. And I hope very much that we can unite behind that move. But in the meantime, we've got to bridge the gap. And I believe it is sheer folly for this government not to take advantage of the resource that we've got in the North Sea to help to bridge that gap. It is an absolute nonsense to buy in fuel from Norway or elsewhere when we could be producing it from the same sources ourselves. And we should be doing that. Don't tell me it's a drop in the ocean. It's an important potential contributor to bridging the gap in our energy needs. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State, sadly no longer with us, derided. I take no lessons from a former failed leader of the opposition, but the Secretary of State, in extremely derisory fashion, spoke of the minimal cost to agricultural land of solar panels. Those solar panels are covering, in East Kent, agricultural land on which was growing bread-making wheat. My right honourable friend referred to the breadbasket of England. We can't lose that land, and we don't need to lose it when we've got acres of rooftops in public ownership and acres of car parks that could and should be used first. Now, the Secretary of State said we're going to have to produce the network to get the future power to the homes and the businesses and the hospitals and the schools that we have to feed. He implied that that requires a network of pylons right across the United Kingdom. I am not prepared as a grandparent to see my grandchildren's future environment sacrificed on the altar of hideous pylons strung up by National Grid simply to meet the desires of their shareholders. And we need to remember that it is a private company. We've got to learn, Madam Deputy Speaker, how to underground our cables. It's happening throughout Europe, where they've already got overhead cables and they're taking them down. But National Grid, through, for example, the Sea project, is planning on building, in my corner of England, a 90-foot-high converter station, the size of 5 football pitches, built on marshland, which they've just discovered is wet, which means they're going to have to import thousands of tons of concrete and destroy the whole of the local environment around it, which includes a nature reserve and a site of special scientific interest. That is not progress. That is selling the family silver. It's selling the environment of our children's future, and we must not do that. So I believe we have to strike a balance between meeting our future needs, bridging the gap, and protecting our environment. And, Madam Speaker, I've got 18 seconds left, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Dame Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the measures in the King's speech on energy security. As on many other issues, the opposition's wrong-headed approach would leave us tethered to global markets that we can't control. They'd lock our country out of much-needed jobs, and they'd condemn Brits to higher bills. Yeah. The energy independence and nuclear regulation bills, in contrast, are further leaps towards the stronger energy security we need. In my speech today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to tackle an issue touched on actually by the previous speaker in his remarks, an issue which will increasingly drive the amount of energy our country needs to generate: the development and deployment of artificial intelligence. The Government did not bring forward in this King's speech our manifesto commitment to ensure the safe development and use of AI models by introducing binding regulation on the handful of companies developing the most powerful AI models. Indeed, AI was not mentioned in the speech. The government has acted decisively on one symptom of the lack of regulation, the widespread production of sexualised images. This, however, followed 3 million such images being generated. Harm was already done, and I underline here recent comments made by my right honourable friend for Birmingham Yardley. Now, the government has, rightly in my view, launched its Sovereign AI Fund, supporting innovative startups to scale up and generate value here in the UK, including access to compute. And I know many of the ministers, indeed, from the Department for Energy have been working hard to ensure the capacity is there to deliver that additional compute. However, when it comes to the design and use of AI systems and models, we have only the AI Security Institute, a world-first, expert-led organisation, but one which lacks statutory powers and which has to ask companies politely to engage. Even the Trump administration now appears to recognise the need for evaluation of frontier AI models before release. If we're genuinely serious about our country's economic security, we must devote as much attention to AI and its astonishingly transformative, productive and disruptive potential as we're rightly devoting to energy security and the delivery of homegrown renewables. That will require, first, working with the EU on digital regulation, and I will push for this to be reflected in the Welcome EU Partnership Bill. The government maintains in the briefing pack for the King's Speech that nearly 1/3 of UK AI startup leaders are considering relocating overseas due to regulatory complexity and capital constraints. Given that regulatory complexity will often relate to cross-border issues, the prescription is not here deregulation, but regulatory coordination. I want to keep to time, thank you. Capital constraints and relatedly constraints in compute are real. Here we must recognise that while unilateral measures to support sovereign AI are important, their scope is necessarily limited, so we must again work with reliable partners who share our values, not least within the EU. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must be brave enough to open up discussion on the fiscal framework for AI. We currently tax the very thing, labour, that AI will, in some sectors, in specific ways, displace. We must examine now how we might be able to use the public stake from our sovereign AI investments, or mechanisms like a token tax or reform to capital gains, as the TUC has suggested, to build up the resources that may well be needed. There is potential for significant disruption to the labour market, and we must be more ready for it. Research out today from King's College London suggests 69% of workers and 64% of employers are worried about the economic impact of AI-related job losses. A majority of all groups surveyed predict AI's benefits will mainly go to wealthy investors and companies, not workers or society, and a majority of all groups also back government intervention. If we are to secure the government's intention of the fastest adoption of AI in the G7, we must deal with these issues too. Our young people in particular will not forgive us if we fail to engage with this generational challenge. Thank you.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Britain is becoming harder to govern. That's not principally because of disruptive or destabilising societal change, and it's not even because of the increasingly complicated world which is creating more uncertainty for all governments. The problem is in governance itself. The Prime Minister complains that he pulls levers in Downing Street, but they have less effect in practice than he hoped. And Simon Case, when he left office, put this very clearly. He said, an increasing number of English devolution settlements, independent quangos, arm's body, courts, statutory consultees and the like block the path what a winning political party promises at an election, what it can achieve in power. Successive governments have delegated power to all kinds of unelected, unaccountable bodies. Everything from the budget for the Office for Budget Responsibility to Network Rail, from the Environment Agency to all kinds of other quangos, many of whose names we barely know, and neither do we know how their membership is chosen or to whom they are held account. It's time for a more radical programme than this Queen's speech offers. It's time for Parliament and Government to be more confident about the difference it can make. Now, the Secretary of State in opening this debate talked about economic resilience, and he's right, by the way, absolutely right, that in the age in which we live, we need to build more national economic resilience. But that means facing up to the fact that we manufacture too little of what we consume, we grow too little of the food that we need to feed the nation. And the sort of economic resilience that he describes requires us to look again at the balance of payments. Before the 1970 election, it was said that Harold Wilson, the then Labour Prime Minister, lost that election against expectations because there were bad balance of trade figures. No one now speaks of the balance of trade. And yet the truth is that we import far more than we did then. In the mid-1980s, we grew about 75% of the food we consume. That's now down to 40%. It is preposterous that we've lengthened supply lines, that we've, as a result, decreased traceability. We don't really know where much of what we consume is made or how it's made or by whom it's made. We know that in the Far East there's all kinds of unacceptable conditions that wouldn't be tolerated in this country, and yet we still choose to import large amounts of those kinds of goods. So let's have a fresh look at the character, the shape of our economy, if we really want to build more national economic resilience. To do that, we will also need to look at productivity, because as the Father of the House described, it's not good enough for government to spend endlessly without looking at the value it gets from that expenditure, and yet we know that both public sector and private sector productivity has stalled for a considerable time. Not unique to this country. It's a problem for the whole of Western Europe, most modern economies. But nonetheless, we need new measures to focus on productivity so that what we get for what we spend becomes the issue, not how much we spend as a whole.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's giving quite a good lecture on what needs to happen. What incentives do we need to provide farmers to grow more and indeed use their land as effectively as possible, and also employers to use their time as effectively as possible, so that we can literally operate on a 24-hour-day, 3-shift operation in production?
Yeah. Let me just before I deal with that excellent point, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for making it, just remind the House the current trade deficit is about 25 billion, by the way. That would be unthinkable a generation or two ago. And on the issue that he described, we have to rebalance the food chain. For too long, major retailers have held a gun to the head of primary and secondary producers. It's not the size of the cake that matters, it's who's getting what sort of slice of the cake. So whilst those major retailers continue to make huge profits, the people who actually grow, make the food, have seen their livelihoods under persistent pressure for the whole of the time I've been in this House, and no government has really had the courage to face up to that fact. So we need to give more power to the grocery code adjudicator, to intervene where sharp practice takes place, and to stand up for the hard-working farmers in Lincolnshire and even farmers elsewhere, but particularly ones in Lincolnshire, of course, who grow so much of the food which we consume across the kingdom. If we're going to build productivity, we have to invest in skills. Now, when I was the skills minister, I'm proud to say we built apprenticeship starts to around 500,000 a year. Still not enough, in my view. I think we should be having more apprenticeships than that. We've got it up to about 500,000 a year. That's fallen to about 350,000 now. We have fewer apprenticeship starts than we did then. We have to re-evaluate what advanced learning looks like. Higher education is all very well, but higher learning matters just as much. And vocational, practical and technical skills both deliver for the economy because they satisfy economic need, and they give people a chance for fulfilment whose aptitudes, whose tastes and talents lie in that direction. So to build productivity, we need to invest in skills. That's the kind of radical programme. Productivity, tackling the trade deficit and building skills that I'd hope to see. And I implore the government to address those kinds of issues in the common interest, for the national good, for the common good and the national interest.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman from Southall and the Deepings, who made a characteristically interesting speech. I agree with him very much on the need to improve our investment in productivity and skills. Can I start by making a very brief tribute to Susanna Reeves, to Joanna Midgley, to John Hacking and to Angela Garside, who are 4 councillors who lost their seats in the elections last week in my constituency, not because they weren't excellent councillors. Every single one of them was a brilliant councillor, deeply rooted in their community, but because the public wanted to give the government a kicking. So maybe I should apologise to them for the loss of their seats on that basis. And I think that's because we haven't communicated as a government, and this is not any individual, this is collectively, we haven't communicated the really good work we've been doing in the last session, laying the foundations for recovery for this country. And this is a King's Speech which is packed with measures to carry on that work and to do the same and to move forward faster. Like the Energy Independence Bill, as the Secretary of State has set out, the move to clean power is absolutely key, not just to build the green industry and the green jobs of the future, but to deliver the climate commitments that so many people in my patch in South Manchester care about. Now, I'm very conscious of limited time, so I'm going to focus on some of the measures which will make a big difference to my constituents in Manchester Withington. I want to start with the Northern Powerhouse Bill. Very strongly welcoming that. HS2, when HS2 was cancelled, it was a real kick in the teeth to people in the north. We were looking for the link up to the northern economy to the southeast, and notwithstanding the shambolic planning and delivery that the Secretary of State set out earlier on behalf of HS2 Limited, overseen by the government, it was a real shame that was cancelled. But we've always argued in the north that Northern Powerhouse Rail is actually more important. To get that connectivity east-west across the great cities of the north will drive our economy and make us able to thrive and compete on a global scale. So I'm really pleased that the government has set out the Northern Powerhouse Rail Bill. 2 points I want to make very briefly on that. Firstly, can I get in, maybe I'm the first to do this in respect to this new bill, can I make a plea? We need that underground through station at Manchester Piccadilly as part of that delivery. Anything, I mean, it's expensive, but anything else will be a false economy. That will be the way that we drive the connectivity across the cities of the north, and we need to do that. And the other thing I'd like to just make a plea on is a clarity early on the route. I think the route proposed from Manchester Airport to the city of Manchester at Piccadilly is under my constituency, as previously proposed. There was some controversy and some discussion about the site's event shaft, so I'm not going to get into that detail now, but it's really important that we give our constituents early details and an early opportunity to have their voice on that. I want to say something very briefly on the overnight visitor bill, only because it's taken some criticism from a number of places in the last couple of weeks. In Manchester, we've had one since 2023, an overnight visitor levy, and believe it or not, the sky hasn't fallen in. We're still the 3rd most visited city in the UK, and the key point about this is permissive. It's not an obligation. And I'm sure many of us will visit cities across Europe, across the US, and the visitor tax that we see in those cities never put me off, even in my impoverished interrailing days. It's not going to stop people wanting to visit a city like Manchester, and it drives investment into the destinations that makes them more attractive to visitors. In my constituency, common hold and leasehold reform bill, it will be hugely welcomed. Too many leaseholders have been trapped in the system with spiralling charges, opaque management, limited rights over their own homes. And our excellent housing minister is already making a difference on that, and I'm really pleased to see that coming forward. Likewise, the social housing bill, which will make a big difference. Since I became an MP in 2015, the biggest issue in my inbox has been housing, and it's really important that we can expand our house building. Very briefly, I want to mention the ticket touting bill. It's, in my role as the APPG on ticket abuse, I've realised that ticket touts are costing approximately £400,000 every single day, and that's intensifying the cost of living pressures for households across the UK. So it's great that the government has set out a draft bill. It's disappointing that it's only a draft bill, and can I urge, it's really important to get it right, but can I urge the government to bring that forward as quickly as possible. I'm going to end on a positive note. I've had a number of occasions to deal with gov.uk and one login in recent times. Digital access to services is making a big difference already. Let's ignore the conspiracy theorists and get on with the digital access to services bill to improve our services for everybody.
Aaron.
It's an honour to follow the honourable member for Withington. Something I find less pleasurable and indeed detest is the use of the phrase in our discourse that Britain is broken. I hate that phrase because it's not true. I wonder if we can reflect on how damaging and intoxicating the opium of nostalgia is. And it's not like a wistful nostalgia, harmless and benign, used by commentators and politicians. It's an angry and aggressive and malign form of nostalgia. The reality is, let's open up and be honest about this. There was never a golden age, and the idea that somehow everything in the past is better and today it's all rotten and broken is utterly poisoning our democracy and our discourse. Let's be honest, the only thing that was better about the past consistently is that the music was better and we were younger. So let's not fall for witless, unpatriotic guff about Britain being in terminal decline. We are a wonderful people with a history strong and rich and resources second to none. We are not broken, but we must be better. A wise government would acknowledge our challenges and strengthen our alliances with NATO, with the Commonwealth, and indeed reconnecting with Europe, not least on energy security. John Maynard Keynes famously said, "When the facts change, I change my mind." What do you do, sir? You don't need to love everything about the European Union to know that our security and sovereignty now obviously depends on our deepening and widening alliances. We need to see Europe as the third bloc alongside the US and China, and if we are not part of that, if we are detached, then we are not safe. But our security involves looking internally too on energy and food security. Over the last few weeks, the energy market has been in the eye of the storm, of course. The loss of 14.4 million barrels a day of crude oil. I will give way. Yes, sure.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Food prices have become the biggest pressure on family budgets. Our food system is failing as households, it's failing our farmers, and it's also failing the economy alike. It's clear that a good food bill is a glaring missed opportunity to back British farmers and improve public health. So does my honourable friend agree with me that you can't have food security without energy security, and that the government must set out a national food strategy to support this?
I want to strongly support my honourable friend's food security bill, and I will come to that in a moment. The fact that we have seen this loss of crude oil output from the Gulf since Donald Trump's war began, it's been partly offset by draining stockpiles and other temporary reliefs. For the developed world, prices have risen and indeed crippled many communities that I represent in Westmoreland and indeed across the whole of our country. But so far, we have yet to run out. But the International Energy Agency warned just last week that oil inventories are being depleted at a record pace. Governments, companies and consumers need, therefore, to be ready. Are we? I do not think so. Energy security is now utterly and totally urgent. If I cannot convince you of all of the science that points at human-made climate change, the need to tackle that catastrophic blight that we face, if I cannot convince you on that level, surely I must be able to convince you that our energy security rests on renewable energy, domestically produced, because Putin cannot turn off the sun, the wind or our waves. Surely we should be therefore rejoining the European international energy market, and we should be investing massively in the national grid. But it is also vital that we recognise, as my honourable friend rightly and wisely said, the importance of food security in all this. The United Kingdom is currently only 55% food secure. The outsourcing of our agriculture has become a national security liability. We need more short, diversified food chains with more incentives to primary producers to grow food domestically. The problem is, though, England is now the only country in the United Kingdom and the only country in Europe that no longer provides support for our farmers to produce food. Now, maybe we could agree that back in 2020, when the Environmental Land Management Scheme was being drawn up by the previous government and adopted by this government, maybe we could agree that that was how things felt at the time. But The facts have changed. It's time to change our mind and to back our farmers to produce the food that we need. The facts have changed. Food prices are projected to be 50% higher in November this year than they were in 2021. Agricultural inflation is double regular inflation and therefore feeding food inflation, which will follow and harm our communities. And of course, we live against the backdrop of uncertainty. The technological and geopolitical shifts that we are living through include, of course, the very threat to the future of NATO, Russian and Chinese aggression. So our energy, food and military resilience matters more now than it ever has before. We are fools if we do not respond. So, you see, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are not a broken country. We are a brilliant country, but we are a vulnerable country. We should not be energy insecure. We should not be food insecure. We should not have the smallest army we've had in 200 years. We should not be decoupled from our allies in Europe. But the good news is that we can fix all of these things if we have the will. It will mean uncomfortable choices and changed stances from many. But the facts have changed, so we need to change our minds.
Emma Foodie.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm really pleased to be able to speak in this debate today on the gracious speech, because this government was elected to deliver change, and in my community for too long we've felt at best ignored and at worst left behind. Decisions taken in Whitehall and Westminster did not address the challenges that we faced. That investment didn't reach us, opportunities didn't reach us, frankly, Westminster didn't hear us. And the measures in the last King's speech began to change that. The English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill brings decisions closer to home. The changes to the Green Book give us a fair go at securing the investment that we deserve. Breakfast clubs and free school meals set up children not just for the day, but to give them the best start in life. We're starting the process of bringing buses back into public control. Public services are showing signs of recovery following 14 years of austerity. And this King's speech builds on that. But we must deliver more and we must deliver it faster. And today's debate is rightly about energy. And recently I visited the Port of Blyth in my honourable friend, the member for Ashington and Blyth's constituency, and I heard about their vision and the jobs and the opportunities that the renewables sector is already bringing there. We have been at the mercy of repeated international crises, underlining why we must secure energy independence to protect people here and across the country. Previous governments didn't move quickly enough, and we are paying the price. Now, my region is leading the way to build clean, renewable energy and energy security. New seabed site off our coast can unlock at least 6 gigawatts of offshore capacity. That is billions of pounds of investment coming to our region, creating jobs and opportunity. And in my own constituency, the West Hertford Business Park, with support from Arlington and the Port of Blyth, will unlock 2,000 jobs and more than 400 million of local investment. The Moor Farm roundabout upgrades, never knowingly not mentioned by me, add to the sense of possibility and acting as a gateway to growth across the North East. We're building futures here. Energy Central Campus at Blyth and the Energy Academy, in Wallsend are training a new generation of skilled workers for the industries of the future. And when the opposition talk down clean energy, they are talking down opportunity. Opposing this drive could cost up to 17,000 jobs in our regional renewable sector. So members opposite should level with my communities about what their plans mean for their jobs and their families. The Energy Independence Bill will take us further, and I want my region at the very heart of it. Now, as a Labour and Cooperative MP, I'm proud that we're delivering community energy and the local power plan too, ensuring that by 2030 every community can benefit from a local energy project, transforming our energy future and giving communities a stake in clean, affordable power. And turning to a few other measures set out in the speech. Since being elected, I've championed the rights of leaseholders and freeholders. It is a huge issue in my community. In the 60s new towns of Cramlington and Killingworth, many homes were built as leasehold and too many are now trapped without the protections that they deserve. Similarly, our new build estates, although some of these have been around for over a decade and push the definition of new build, still have not been adopted. And I know ministers are passionate about ending these injustices and putting the protections that are needed in place once and for all. And also building on the work of my honourable friend, the member for Washington and Gateshead South, around ticket touting. Since being elected, I've worked alongside the Cooperative Party, calling for action to tackle ticket touts and price gouging for culture, music and sport and events. Because it's fans that make events, whether gigs, matches or shows, and are at the heart of these. And too often, they are robbed of the opportunities or ripped off through price surging and touts reselling tickets. There are many other bills in this programme that I support, Madam Deputy Speaker, that will make a real difference in my community. On housing, education, national security and immigration, this King's Speech is a programme to build on the change that has already been delivered, but to go further and faster, to extend opportunity to communities like mine, with measures to improve the lives at the heart of this programme, to provide the good jobs and opportunities of the future. It's now time to get on with delivering this change, and I look forward to supporting these measures.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Cravenington and Killingworth. And as a scientist by background, I welcome now the cross-party agreement towards nuclear power forming a key part of our energy supply for the future. It wasn't always the case that was the case. Certainly on the Labour benches previously, there was opposition to nuclear power, and indeed from the Liberal Democrat benches. So I'm delighted now that we have agreement that this is the positive way forward. And indeed, the key here is making sure we have a mixed economy in terms of energy supply. I welcomed, for example, the use of solar power on the roof of the Aspire Centre adjacent to the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, granted by the previous Conservative government, which means that the supply for that centre and the hospital is actually contained from that solar, and it contributes towards the grid as well. This is welcome news. But I can't understand why the government doesn't agree to actually exploit the North Sea to a further extent. It won't come on stream straight away, but surely we must be thinking about it for the future. To cover one or two other areas, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Vagrancy Act has coming to an end, but we still require from the government, and there's no commitment in the King's Speech, for the necessary statutory instrument to make that happen. Can we see that happen? Equally on the Social Housing Renewable Bill, the government's ambition is huge, but timid. We must go faster and further to provide the much-needed social housing that is required in this country that has not been built for more than 30 years. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we live in a dangerous world. The reality is, with the war in Ukraine causing energy price hikes, indeed we must think about what has that done for the Treasury in terms of windfall from the petrol pumps going into the Treasury. But at the same time, a fragile truce in the Middle East, the civil war in Sudan, where more people are being killed than anywhere else in any other conflicts, and indeed the 500,000 Christians in Nigeria who've been massacred by Islamists. The sad reality is, on the 7th of October 2023, I was absolutely appalled that after the attempt by Hamas to commit genocide on the people of Israel, we saw people celebrating on our streets what was going on. We've then, subsequently, a blind eye was turned to the hate marches that were assembled outside a synagogue in London, 100 yards away at midday, just as the Shabbat services were coming to an end. And that's continued week after week after week, with the congregation being intimidated from going about their lawful business. Now, the Prime Minister quite rightly talked about combating anti-Semitism, but it's not enough to have words. We need action now. A blind eye was turned to the Hamas flags and the Hezbollah flags in those marches. A deaf ear was cocked to from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free, which means the destruction of the State of Israel. Equally, a deaf ear was cocked to globalise the Intifada. And what have we seen as a result? We have seen Jewish businesses attacked. We've seen restaurants attacked. We've seen synagogues attacked. And now we see Jewish people on the streets being attacked purely because of their religion. This is absolutely unacceptable, and we have to start somewhere. So I welcome the decision by the government to bring forward the legislation on prescribing the IRGC, long overdue, and I've led that campaign in this Parliament for many years. But we must go further. Why is the Iranian ambassador still here? He should be kicked out. So should the embassy closed down. And all those so-called diplomats refused entry to this country. Iran is the head of the snake that controls all the terrorism in the Middle East, and we must recognise that. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
One thing that the government here hasn't done, but which they could do, and the honourable gentleman I know will want to see that, the same as I would, and probably many others in this House, that's the Iranian assets owned by the government that are in London, and they're all well known where they are. Does the honourable gentleman feel like I do, that it's time that those assets were taken away from them here in London, where we have some control?
I thank the honourable member for that. And clearly, the assets from the IRGC and the despotic regime that exists in Iran must be sequestrated and brought into use for the people of this country. There are 11 well-known properties which are detached houses that are not used at the moment but owned by this despotic regime. They could be used for homeless families. They could be used for Brits that need somewhere to live, but we don't take the necessary action. Equally, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've raised previously, we have 13 charities that get their funding from Iran. They have their headquarters in the UK, and they're banned in Arab countries. Why is it they're allowed to exist and spread their poison? Equally, we must go further on university campuses. Vice-Chancellors have a duty to protect Jewish students, but don't carry out that duty. And perhaps we could start in our schools by teaching our children the true history of the Middle East. In 1948, the Arab countries tried to prevent Israel from being set up. They encouraged and almost forced the Arabs to leave the state of Israel so they could go in and kill everyone. The reality is Israel won that war, and no one's ever forgiven them since. The sad fact is that if we go into 1967, 1971, where Israel fought wars once again to protect itself, those are not taught in our schools. And we need to understand that if we don't educate our children in this right way, then unfortunately propaganda will be allowed to grow. Why is it that one of our colleagues from the Labour benches was banned from going into school in his constituency solely because he's Jewish? That cannot be acceptable. So words are not enough, Madam Deputy Speaker. We need prompt action and firm action to root out anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hatred once and for all.
Rachel Hopkins. Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate on the gracious speech. And I'm proud, since our Labour government took office in July 2024, that we've introduced a number of policies to improve our country's energy independence and therefore our energy security by increasing domestic clean energy production and reducing reliance on imported fossil fuels. And one of the best examples of this is the creation of Great British Energy, a publicly owned energy investment designed to support British clean energy projects. And I also welcome our Clean Power 2030 plan, which will mean most UK electricity comes from low-carbon domestic sources by the end of the decade. And this includes expanding offshore wind, removing planning barriers to onshore wind, increasing solar power generation, investing in grid infrastructure and supporting nuclear and carbon capture projects. And this King's speech has outlined our plans to go faster and further, taking definitive action to protect the energy, defence and economic security of the United Kingdom for the long term, including the introduction of an energy independence bill to scale up homegrown renewable energy and protect living standards, helping to tackle the affordability crisis, particularly for low-income households, including through our Warm Homes plan. We've seen firsthand... Sorry, I'm going to continue short on time. We've seen firsthand the devastating impact of exposure to volatile international gas markets, which caused major price rises after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This government is taking measures to protect our citizens and ensure such stark and unaffordable increases are never passed on to households again, regardless of global conflicts, supply disruptions and sudden rises in international energy prices. With the war in the Middle East being felt in the pockets of people at home, this is more important than ever. And I welcome the fact that more stable energy costs for households and businesses in Luton South and South Bedfordshire and across the country is a priority, while giving the government greater flexibility during international crises. Our government's mission to secure our energy independence is just one facet of the work this Labour government is doing to strengthen our sovereign capability, using the economic freedom gained after leaving the EU to have greater democratic oversight and to intervene more directly in the economy through our industrial strategy and public investment,
with a focus on backing British business and good, skilled, unionised jobs. There's no better example of this than our commitment to safeguard the domestic production of steel through the Steel Industry Nationalisation Bill, which we will debate later this week. This highlights the importance of the role of an active state in supporting its citizens, protecting our national resilience, our economic security, and our ability to act independently in the interests of our citizens in an increasingly volatile and uncertain world. I've spoken about the sovereignty and security of energy, but part of building a more secure Britain for my constituents is to ensure that everyone has access to a safe and secure home. And I welcome our Labour government's commitment to address long-term housing shortages, which have driven up rents, made home ownership harder and placed increasing pressure on social housing and public services. Increasing our supply through long-term investment in social and council housing with significant restrictions on right to buy under the Social Housing Renewal Bill, alongside planning reforms and reform of the leasehold system, including the capping of ground rents, will make the housing market more affordable and stable, particularly for families in constituencies like mine of Luton South and South Bedfordshire, where more affordable family homes are so desperately needed. Indeed, expanding our housing supply goes hand in hand with our efforts to strengthen our national resilience, reducing housing inequality and creating a stable foundation for long-term social and economic security, all part of building a stronger and fairer country for all.
Richard Ford.
Speaker, last week in the gracious speech, the government pledged to introduce a new representation of the people bill. Now, constitutional issues like the electoral system can seem far removed from people's daily lives, but that could not actually be further from the truth, because with a better electoral system, politicians and parties will be more focused on the issues that really matter to voters. Electoral reform is a necessary step to ensure a fairer society with better schools, better hospitals, safer communities, clean air and clean water. The representation of the People Bill has the potential to be the latest chapter in the evolution of our democracy. Ours is a proud history of a franchise that has expanded across the generations, extending the vote to an ever broader base of people. From the 1832 Great Reform Act to the 1918 Representation of the People Act, which granted the right of voting to women, to the 1969 Act, which made the UK the first democracy to give votes to everyone 18 and above. This is a story of progress, and we should continue it. So I welcome that the government is continuing this trend with votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. When I trained 16 and 17-year-old recruits in the regular army, some of them were bound months later to serve in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, which they did. If 16-year-olds can join our armed forces and pay tax, they deserve a voice in how both of those are used. The new representation of the People Bill has the potential to occupy a place in the pantheon of progressive extensions to the franchise. First past the post, by contrast, is our current system, which enables parties to turn a small plurality of votes into a massive majority of seats. And 2024 showed this at its worst. The general election of 24 was the most disproportionate in modern British history. Turnout was the second lowest since records began in 1885. Less than 60% of the electorate cast a vote. They were unconvinced and uninspired by both Labour and the Conservatives. Labour won 1/3 of the vote, Labour won 2/3 of the seats, and Labour won 3/3 of the levers of power. The 2024 general election result was a direct consequence of the first-past-the-post voting system. This winner-takes-all approach threatens to reward populists who thrive in divisive and adversarial politics. I'm speaking this afternoon not in relation to our party political self-interest here in the Liberal Democrats. We were delivered a result. We were delivered a result that was proportionate to the votes that were cast. But look around me. For the MPs from Reform UK or from the Green Party, if the 2024 general election had been conducted under the additional member system of PR, Reform UK would now have 94 MPs sitting on these benches. The Green Party would have 42 MPs sitting on these benches. Instead, we have 5 and we have 4. The disparity between votes cast and the seats won adds significantly to the disillusion that many of us will have heard on the streets of the UK when we were out there campaigning in the local elections earlier this month.
Will you give way?
I will.
On that point. So, I thank you for giving way. Is not the biggest problem with first past the post that often you're voting against someone rather than for someone, and that poisons our democracy because everyone thinks they end up with someone that they don't want?
The honourable member for Tunbridge Wells is spot on. He's spot on. Former Labour voters, I accept former Labour voters vote for me to keep out the Tories and Reform. Former Conservative voters vote for me to keep out Labour and the Green Party. This is not a system we want. We want a system where people can vote positively for change with hope. Little wonder that the only other European country besides the UK that elects their parliament this way is Belarus. If first past the post continues, we could see just 30% of votes bringing in the government with extremist ideas. I want to see a proportionate number of MPs for Reform UK and for the Green Party, not a disproportionate number. I don't agree with them on universal access, on defence or on immigration. On universal access, it's the Reform UK that's talking about tax breaks for people who opt out of the NHS. The Green Party is talking about bringing in a basic income for everybody, with no conditions. One wants to strip us of universal healthcare, the other one wants to have taxpayers paying for a universal income. On defence, whether it is Reform UK apologising for Putin's aggression against Ukraine, or the Green Party pledging to dismantle the UK's nuclear weapons, one is lowering the Ukrainian flag over town councils that it controls, while the other would hoist the white flag over defence establishments in this country. On immigration, whether it is the Green Party threatening to end proper controls, or...
Can I encourage the honourable gentleman to return to at least some of the substance of His Majesty's gracious address? Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, these parties do not represent the moderate majority, but with as little as 30% of the vote at the next general election, they could control all of the levers of power. First past the post is unfair, unrepresentative, and it undermines the legitimacy of our elections. I urge the government not to prolong the disenchantment, the apathy, and the hopelessness. People are fed up with being told to vote for the lesser evil. The representation of the People Bill is the opportunity this government has to get it right. Thank you.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I agree with every word that the honourable member has just said about first past the post and proportional representation. It's Labour Party policy. It unites the left and the right of the Labour Party. I think it's probably one of the few things that the honourable member for North Durham and I work together on passionately. And if colleagues on this side of the House think that first past the post was great for us in the last election, then just wait till the next election. It's the right thing to do, it's the most democratic thing to do, and it's also the best thing to do in our own self-interest. Madam Deputy Speaker, our party came into government against a backdrop of deindustrialisation, privatisation and austerity, which over the course of decades has bled this country dry. It's left millions of people in abject poverty, in the 5th richest country in the world, and millions more struggling to get by. Of course, people are enraged by the state of our society, but grifting far-right politicians declaring war on minority groups are exploiting this rage to sow division. They are funded by many of the people who cause these problems in the first place, who want us to punch down so we don't look up at them. This threat is on our streets and in our political system. From the Unite the Kingdom rally, mocking Muslim women and calling for mass deportations, including of British citizens, to the Reform councillors celebrating the rape of a Sikh woman and saying that Nigerians should be melted down to fill potholes. Unless we want these people running this country, We have to get our act together. Because while we've done some good things in government, and I want to be clear here that this isn't a criticism of the Secretary of State, who I think has done an excellent job in his role, particularly against some of the flat earthers opposite. But while we've done some good things in government, like improving workers' rights and renters' rights, creating GB Energy, increasing funding to local councils, the fact is we have not delivered change at the pace and the scale that voters expect. And there is also far too much that this government has got wrong, like attempting to limit jury trials, like cutting benefits for disabled people, its failures over the genocide in Gaza. These mistakes and the refusal to learn from them are fueling the collapse of the two-party system and the rise of a multi-party political landscape. But the leadership strategy to stop reform has just reinforced their narrative that immigration is what's wrong with our society. And not only is that completely at odds with Labour values, but it's also been a complete electoral disaster. We have smashed apart our own voter coalition, and as we hemorrhage votes to the Greens, we're also delivering seats to reform. Madam Deputy Speaker, I refuse to put a positive spin on the last 2 years because I want us to be better. We have to face unpleasant facts. I know it's painful. It's painful for all of us because we all believe in the potential of a Labour government. We all understand what is at stake here. And I know that colleagues who disagree with this analysis do also genuinely want to improve people's lives and stop a far-right government. But I'm afraid the argument that we can achieve this by sticking to a failed political strategy just does not hold water. This Labour government needs a total reset to show that it's listening, that it understands what it got wrong, and that it has a clear plan to change. But its response to a catastrophic performance in the local elections has been to double down on the same incrementalism that we've seen thus far. And this is what we've seen again in this King's speech. While there are positives like the Hillsborough Law, measures for Ukraine, a commitment to ban conversion practices, it's clear to most of us that they are not enough. There are much bolder measures that we should be taking to tackle the cost of living crisis and to rebalance the economy so that it works for working class people. Just 2 examples: rent controls, so housing costs are affordable and people aren't priced out of their communities; nationalising utilities to prioritise public need over private profit and bring down bills. And we need to do that at the same time as unashamedly standing up for the full diversity of the working class, wherever people were born, whatever the colour of their skin, their religion, their sexuality or gender identity, whether they're disabled or not, whether they're in work or not. Madam Deputy Speaker, tinkering around the edges was never going to cut it. Chasing the far right, yes.
I thank her for giving way, and I agree with so much of what she's saying. We need to be ambitious. We need to be looking at the big picture and fixing systems as well as situations. Like her, I want to see us stepping out in a far more ambitious way from here onward. And I see the headings of these bills in the King's speech offer huge potential for us to do things that are far more transformative and meaningful and address the root causes of many of the problems that we're facing. So does she agree with me that there is a chance with the bills under this King's speech, but with a radical different approach to working them through to bring the kind of change and delivery that we've been hoping for?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I feel like to have a candid discussion about this, it would probably be best not to have it in the chamber. But yes, I think that the King's speech provides headings, but I'm afraid I think that's all they are. They're hints to what we need, and they're not the sum of it. And we haven't been. It's not just that I don't believe that the change is coming, but it's been promised. It hasn't been promised. We're doubling down on the same mistakes that we made. And what we've heard from the Prime Minister is we've done great things in government, you just haven't realised it yet. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, tinkering around the edges was never going to cut it. Chasing the far right on immigration was never going to work. And if we don't learn these lessons now, then it will be too late. We will be squandering the generational opportunity of a Labour government to transform this country for the better, and we will be allowing the far right to win. And I refuse to sit here quietly and let that happen.
Yeah.
Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, because I think she made a very important point at the end there. She is right. I'm afraid to say this is a very underwhelming King's speech. There are some welcome headlines there, but the fact is the ambition is very diminished. And the reason for that, and she represents it, is that the party opposite is fundamentally split. They're unable to move forward boldly in any direction that is needed. And I don't make a personal accusation against them. I know what it's like. I sat on those benches in the last Parliament supporting a government that was also fatally split and unable to move forward. This is the consequence of the politics that we're in. And by the way, I welcome the very eloquent and elegant repudiation of her previous position by my friend, the Shadow Secretary of State. I think she made an excellent speech about the difficulty of the government's policy, and she's now in the right place. But across the board, and particularly on this topic of energy security, Madam Deputy Speaker, we see bold ambition, the right statements being made, particularly about energy independence and resilience. But then the detail that follows is utterly underwhelming. And indeed, explicitly in this area, we see a decision not to exploit the enormous opportunities, the reserves we have in the North Sea. So I'm afraid the aspiration of energy independence that we should all welcome, including eventually to get to the huge benefits of the abundant natural resources that we should be using for energy, we're not going to get there this way. Likewise, in other areas, crucial areas, Madam Deputy Speaker, of national priority, defence being the main one, we hear the right language about the need for investment, the need to recover our defences, which have been sadly depleted over many decades. We have a chronic weakness in our national defences, and yet we see still no defence investment plan, still no clarity on where the money is going to be spent or even where it's coming from. And the reality is, and I represent a military constituency with many amazing tech firms and military firms developing the kit that we need for our defences. They are laying off staff as we speak because the money is not promised, it's not available to them. It is absolutely scandalous. In all of the sectors where the United Kingdom has real current and enormous potential advantages, in these high-tech sectors of fintech, agri-tech, and AI itself, all areas, by the way, which, thanks to Brexit, we are able to drive ahead boldly and independently on. In all of these sectors, we are being hobbled by a lack of ambition and as a chronic inability to release the talents and the opportunities of these sectors. I was going to intervene earlier on the member for Oxford East, who was bewailing the exit of UK tech entrepreneurs in the AI space and saying that we should be more like Europe in that regard. They're not leaving the United Kingdom to go to the EU. They're going to the Middle East, they're going to the United States, they're going to the Far East, because these countries have a pro-tech industrial policy, which is what we need here in our country. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been meeting a whole bunch of businesses recently. We're on a bit of a prawn cocktail operation in the Reform Party. It's amazing which businesses want to come and talk to us at the moment. It's very encouraging. But they are all very depressed about the state of the economy. And one of them said to me recently, yesterday in fact, an AI entrepreneur, said, if we're not careful, this country's economy is simply going to be US tourism. That's all we're going to be able to offer, because we are driving away all of the entrepreneurs, all of the businesses which represent the opportunities for growth in future. I was talking to a pharmaceutical firm last week, now exiting to Europe, yes, to Switzerland in fact. I saw this morning again a company developing the technology for small modular nuclear reactors, giving up, going to the United States. This is what we are doing. We are driving away the talent that we need for the future. And lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very enthused by the opportunities that our high-tech sectors represent and what we could be doing. But there is also the ordinary economy. Labour used to talk a lot about this. The Chancellor wrote a book called The Ordinary Economy, I think, The Everyday Economy, some years ago. That's absolutely a vital focus for us. But what are we doing for those businesses that are the backbones of our high streets, national businesses and SMEs? We're ramping costs onto them, NI contributions, business rates. On the small businesses, the VAT threshold way too high, inhibiting growth, inhibiting job creation. So a government that wants growth, wants productivity, is going in directly the opposite direction. And I would just end with a plea to the ministers. I extol and I applaud their aspiration for a clean transition, but right now we are in a national emergency and we need to crowd in every possible source of electricity that we have to get our economy growing, and that includes nuclear and it includes fossil fuels. Thank you.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in this King's Speech debate, and I'd like to thank the Energy Secretary for another very clear case for the energy transition. Regarding the energy security part of the transition, I welcome the Energy Independence Bill, which is one of the most significant and pragmatic piece of legislation we seek to work on in this Parliament. This bill is directly entwined to our national security. Energy independence sets us free from the energy cost chaos caused by Putin's erratic warmongering. This is another step that enables us to stand in strong solidarity with the people of Ukraine. The stabilisation of energy security will enable us to work on Jo Cox, whose 10th anniversary of her tragic murder is coming up shortly. Work on her agenda of progressive internationalism by improving our capacity to be a force for good. On Jo's progressive internationalism, I'm also proud to see the European Partnership Bill and welcome the Youth Mobility Scheme many of my constituents will be able to take advantage on. So I'm keen to see even more progress in terms of our European relationship, including freedom for European musical acts to tour Europe and visa-free travel. Furthermore, I'd like to hail the Power Rail with delivery of a fair deal for the north of England, something we've been sadly neglected through the last 14 years of Conservative government prior to 2024, through Northern Powerhouse Rail Bill, a scheme, if you remember, that was announced and then cancelled by the previous Conservative government. That all being said, there is certainly more work to be done on the Clean Water Bill in the speech. To ensure we establish true water resilience in terms of our national energy security, we must ensure the bill does not tie us into a failed, privatised system owned by overseas actors. The only route to water security is through mutual ownership. In England, we should have the system like they have in Wales, where the people of Wales own the water company. This is notably different to 1970-style nationalisation. As we know, nationalisation at the mercy of any future government who might seek to privatise it again, whereas mutual ownership puts the public first, where local people make key decisions about their water supply systems. We should see mutual ownership of the entire water industry. This will ensure a stable and secure future for our water systems. The public must have a say in the future of our water. Generally clean waterways, publicly owned, secure for the future of the nation. Restoring waterways and nature is not separate from national security, it underpins it. My Amendment G, as on today's order paper, recognise that functioning and healthy ecosystems reduce flood risk, protect our homes, hospitals and transportation systems from overheating, sustain soils to be able to grow food and clean the air we breathe. The UK's key ecosystems are every bit as vital as our roads, energy grid and water networks, yet we continue to treat them as an afterthought. As the Treasury Commission Das Gupta review made clear, we undervalue the natural assets our economy and security depend on. By legislating for a strategic nature network and recognising it as national infrastructure, we can restore, connect and maintain a system of key functional ecosystems that strengthen our national security, protect communities and build resilience across the UK. As other members have mentioned the prospect of electoral reform in the representation of the people bill, I also want to say that we've just seen a local council elections where we had a council elected on 20.5% of the vote, even lower than the lowest percentage at the last general election. We are seeing increasingly lower percentage winning margins as we move from a 5-party system in England and a 6-party system in Scotland and Wales. We need a national conversation and we need to think about this clearly for the long-term future of our country, which is why I will be placing an amendment on the representation of the people bill to establish a national commission for electoral reform, which I urge the government to do, so we have clear actions going forward about the future of our voting system and its integrity. Just to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure that the Treasury bench has heard what I've had to say about the amendment, about the need to include nature as infrastructure. So I'm now withdrawing my amendment, knowing that the spirit of the amendment has been heard and taken on by the government. Thank you.
Jo Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. the security of energy, the price of energy, is something that affects every household, every individual and every business up and down the country in every constituency. It's a matter that concerns everyone. That's why the Secretary of State, when he was in opposition during the last election, promised to cut household energy bills by £300. But instead, in government, he's presided over an increase in household energy bills of £200. That is his record as he sets his sights on his next job, the job he so desperately craves, that is the job of replacing the Prime Minister. He is also the Secretary of State that has set up GB Energy, that won't produce any energy, that will cost taxpayers £8 billion, and its own chief executive says will take something like 20 years to employ just 1,000 people. There is nothing in the King's speech that will secure the country's energy supply, that will bring down energy costs, and that will bring the jobs and investment that the government has promised. Now, we've heard from across all benches in this House that there is a consensus, there is a unity. We all want to decarbonise energy use, but on these benches we will not support doing that at the cost of families, households, individuals, particularly those who are hard up and are least able to pay. This is not a binary choice. You're either pro-decarbonisation or you're against it. You can be for it, but understand that security in energy supply, security in household energy bills must come first. What country in the world will run headlong into an ideological experiment for the sake of it and leave hard-up citizens behind? No country in the world. This country shouldn't be one of them. This government shouldn't be one of them. I will give way.
Many of these problems have been put in the too difficult box for too long, and they're long-term and difficult to fix. But does he at least acknowledge that the government's investment through the National Wealth Fund of £600 million into the small modular reactors is a real step forward, which will get people's bills down in the long term?
I accept there are some really difficult questions in and around this whole area of debate. And the truth remains that no government has done more to decarbonise the economy and to bring forward green technology than the last Conservative government. But we will not do it at the expense of hard-up working families. And it's the bonkers green tax agenda that this government is peddling that is harming the debate on decarbonising the economy. And I will get on to an example before I give way, after I give way.
I'm just puzzled by his idea that the last government, and I'm actually very comfortable with accepting that has been a growing consensus about decarbonising of our energy supply, energy system over a period of time, starting with the Climate Change Act when only a handful of Conservative MPs voted against it. However, I am puzzled to say that he thinks that the last Tory government did this without any burden on the taxpayer or indeed bills, when the energy a so-called savings package that Liz Truss put in place cost £44 billion and has left this country in profound debt.
I acknowledge the last government made mistakes. I don't have a problem with that. But it's not an excuse for her government to do even worse on some of those hardships for hard-up working families. No excuse to her government whatsoever. Bonkers green taxes harm the debate, and I will give this House an example. UK ETS levies on the maritime sector, levied on ferry companies that my constituents on the Isle of Wight rely on in order to access things that everyone else takes for granted, like health, like education, like jobs, like seeing friends and family. Next month, you could travel across the Solent to the Isle of Wight and take your car on one return trip for £511 for a 5-mile return crossing. The government, instead of helping us, they say they'll help, and I'm still holding out hope that they will help. Instead, the following month, in July, will levy a tax on the Fishbourne to Portsmouth route. They will levy a carbon emission tax that the ferry company cannot avoid because it cannot decarbonise its ferries and go electric because there is no grid charging capacity in Portsmouth Harbour. There is no grid charging capacity in Southampton either. These aren't strange little harbours. This is the naval base of the United Kingdom and one of the biggest export container ports. Yet there is not the grid capacity to charge an Isle of Wight ferry, but the ferries will pay, and the ferries, guess what, have passed on that charge to consumers, my constituents. I'll give way to the honourable lady to try again.
Briefly on the point specifically on Southampton, it was under the Tory government that the Labour-run Southampton Council wanted to clean up and have that grid connection in order to be able to decarbonise shipping in that port, specifically to tackle air quality in that city and to be able to help exactly the problem. 14 years the Tories had, and they did nothing.
I generally say to the honourable lady, the reason her government is in such a mess and polling at under 20% is because she and her colleagues think the universal excuse for her government's inaction is to blame a previous government. She won that argument at the last election, and since then her government has done nothing. Southampton will have that grid charging capacity for boats in mid-2030s, yet the government is bringing in a charge in July of this year. And do you know what the irony is, Madam Deputy Speaker? One of those ferries does have batteries on board. It's a hybrid boat and can use batteries in order to cross the Solent and not burn fossil fuels. But it's being charged because it cannot use its batteries because it's not got nowhere to plug into. Now, when the EU are bringing in this charge, they are ring-fencing the money they get from ETS to invest in grid capacity in ports. Not the UK government. They're taking the money and shoving it in the Treasury and making no promises about investing in grid capacity. That's not the last government, that's this government. So I say to the front bench, it is bonkers green levies which make no sense, which harm ordinary people, which undermine their entire case for their green agenda.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For more and more UK households and businesses, the monthly energy bill is one of the largest bills, and it is increasing, in large part due to rising international oil and gas prices, which have been exacerbated in turn by the recent war in Iran. And so it's exactly for this reason that for too long we have been energy insecure. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, energy security is needed to give us cost of living security. If we get this right, if we can cut bills, we can cut emissions, and we can cut our dependence on volatile foreign oil and gas markets all at the same time. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I haven't heard yet a single argument from the party opposite as to why continued dependence on those markets is a good idea, including from the Honourable Member for Isle of Wight East, who I follow, as opposed to a driver of price shocks and increases. For most of the last 50 years, the UK has been a net importer of electricity, much of it coming through interconnectors like the one in my constituency of Folkestone and Hythe. And the growth in British renewables is at long last rightly being pushed forward by this government, and it's starting to reduce our heavy reliance on imported energy and fossil fuels. Last year, our energy production was the most British and clean it has been for years. Energy production under this Labour government has defied the doubters who decry the decline of North Sea oil and gas and who urge us to open new fields. I will.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. I just want to make sure that everyone's clear. I think he's talking about electricity, power, not energy. The power that makes up just 20% of our energy mix, not the oil and gas, which makes up the 75% of our energy mix. They're very different things.
I'm interested to hear that she came up with no justification why continuing to be in hock to the international oil and gas markets is not a good idea. So I'm reinforced in that argument from her intervention. I want us to be energy independent and eventually energy dominant. where we are exporting our energy around the world, generating more revenue for the Treasury, creating more jobs here at home, and helping to fix our current account deficit. The new Energy Security Bill rightly seeks to hardwire in strong consumer protections, a stronger watchdog and a more flexible, modern grid, giving Ofcom a clearer duty to protect households, changing how support is targeted to low-income and vulnerable families, and making local grids smarter so people can benefit from cheaper off-peak energy. All of this is not a technical tweak, they are frontline issues on the fight against fuel poverty. The vast majority of my constituents in Folkestone and Hythe and Romney Marsh want to tackle climate change. They do want to lower energy bills, and they want Britain to be energy independent. And the best way of achieving all of these objectives is to deliver a balanced energy mix and to make sure that savings and opportunities reach people's front doors. And that means including a serious warm homes programme, upgrading insulation, modern heating systems and clear duties on landlords so renters are not left shivering in leaky homes while their landlords take all the profits. And solar finance has evolved to the point where there can be no excuse not to have solar on every domestic rooftop, which can allow tenants to benefit from lower bills as well as landlords. And the government must do everything it can to make this a reality. Renewables play a critical part in our energy production along with new nuclear, and we should continue to extract the existing North Sea oil and gas fields, but the government is right to oppose the opening up of new fields, which will not lower people's energy bills because the oil and gas price is determined by global markets. And opening up new fields would undermine our mission, as many colleagues have said, to tackle climate change and would weaken our global leadership role that we have on this issue. And I pay tribute to work of the Secretary of State and the Department on this. The real jobs plan is for energy to invest in clean power, grids, storage and efficiency, and to give workers in existing industries a clear path into those new roles. I will.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I've sat through the entire debate, which is now getting on for 3 hours. I've read the bill. Nobody, not one member of this House, this afternoon, including myself, nor the bill, refer to hydrogen, which is probably the best clean future energy there is.
I thank the right honourable member for his intervention. I agree with him. Hydrogen is an important part of where we need to go, but we need to fix these fundamentals, which were not fixed during the 14 years which came before Labour's election, and we need to get on with those things too. New nuclear creates jobs, and in my constituency we have 2 old nuclear power stations at Dungeness that are currently being decommissioned. And Dungeness is a brilliant candidate for new nuclear technologies with an existing grid connection, land available, close to population centres and with high electricity demand. And fundamentally there is also strong support from the people of Romney Marsh for new nuclear at Dungeness, who understand that this is about good jobs, clean power and long-term investment in their community. And I recently helped organise an event at the community hub that was packed out about new nuclear, with local residents who are desperate for new nuclear power generation to return to their community. And so I commend the actions of this government to help speed up new nuclear technology development. And it was something that my predecessor pushed the Tory government for, his own party, for many years to bring back Dungeness new nuclear to Dungeness. But he got nowhere, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, because his party were just not interested in helping him. And so I do welcome the Nuclear Regulation Bill's intention to implement the Fingleton Review, where it cuts unnecessary delay and duplication. And this is not to say that we undermine environmental protections. Those must, of course, remain effective and credible, as well as evidence-based. And the argument is not nature versus nuclear. Climate change is itself a major threat to habitats and species, so changes must focus on faster decisions, but with real environmental integrity. If we are to achieve true energy security, then we need new nuclear to play a critical role, because the sun does not always shine and the wind does not always blow. We need warm, efficient homes, fair energy bills, and a regulator with the teeth and the remit to stand up for the public as the system changes. New nuclear can generate a significant number of well-skilled, well-paid, unionised jobs and help support the reindustrialisation of Britain, which we, of course, desperately need. And so can the mass rollout of renewables, grid upgrades and home retrofit. So I welcome the Energy Security Bill and the Nuclear Regulation Bill, especially the measures that help speed up the development of new nuclear. This is about whether families can afford to heat their homes, whether workers have good jobs in the industries of the future, and whether Britain can stand on its own 2 feet in a dangerous world. And I would say to the champions of the oil and gas industry sitting on the benches opposite that they should do the right thing for the country. They should accept we can never get bills down while we rely on international oil and gas markets, and they should support the measures in this bill to give us clean, cheap power and energy independence for our great nation.
Anna Sabine.
Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the many challenges facing rural constituencies like mine is the rising cost of fuel. When the war in Iran pushed up prices, I had constituents telling me they could no longer afford their planned orders of heating oil and would try to manage without heating for as long as they could. And as you might expect, residents in fuel in East Somerset rely heavily on car use and therefore fuel like diesel and petrol in order to access health services. I'm very concerned about the lack of community input into decisions being made around health services, which disproportionately affects communities who have to drive or get the bus or run patient transport services in rural areas. The King's Speech brings forward plans to abolish NHS England, but in my constituency of Frome and East Somerset, NHS Somerset has been running what it calls a test and learn exercise at Frome Community Hospital. For 6 months, the number of beds was temporarily reduced from 24 to 16. And at the end of that period, the test and learn was simply extended for another 6 months, meaning that for a full year, capacity has been reduced and no full consultation with communities about these changes has been required. People are rightly concerned that a reduction in a local service will require them to travel further afield, the cost of which is rising. I have serious concerns about whether the evidence provided so far is strong enough to justify making these changes permanent, and I'm deeply troubled by how little the community has been involved in that conversation. I decided to do my own consultation, hosting a pop-up in Frome 2 weeks ago and asking local people to tell us why the hospital was important to them. One constituent wrote, "I feel strongly that Frome Hospital provides so many services for local people. When I hear from elderly friends who've ended up with long stays in Bath, I find it incomprehensible that once they reach a certain stage of recovery, they can't be moved nearer home." Another said, "It's a shame we must lose beds. My friend was in Bath for 5 weeks, then had to go to Wincanton Hospital for another 7 weeks as there were no beds in Frome. And this was so hard for her family who lived miles away." The people of Frome and its surrounding villages rely on their community hospital, and yet they woke up one morning to find a decision had, in effect, already been made to reduce its capacity. A decision that means some of the most vulnerable members of our community will not have a bed in a local hospital community setting if they're discharged from our general hospital in Bath. For an elderly person, for a carer managing on their own, or for those without access to a car, the risk of being placed in a community hospital somewhere else in Somerset is a serious barrier to suitable care. And a lack of public transport and increasing fuel costs places a huge additional stress on families and carers. 2 weeks ago, I was pleased to meet with the Minister for Care to discuss the government's plan for neighbourhood health centres, a policy I broadly welcome and one which I believe could genuinely benefit parts of my constituency. In this meeting, the Minister was explicit that our Integrated Care Board was required to consult local MPs and other stakeholders on their plans for these new health centres. Not only has our ICB not been in touch, but when we followed up with them ourselves, we were told 2 things. First, they had no idea they were expected to engage with MPs on this. And second, they'd already decided where the hubs would go without consulting anyone else. In both the cases I have set out, there seems to be a lack of mechanism to force ICBs or trusts to consult local people and a total lack of sanction if they fail to do so. People who live in Frome and surrounding villages are the experts in their own lives, and they have helpful, constructive and innovative ideas to input into decision-making around the future of local health services. The government is also overseeing the removal of Health Watch and the Citizens' Senate, 2 additional bodies which centre patient voice at the heart of discussions about their care. I'm worried that without these bodies being replaced, or without mechanisms in place to ensure good consultation, communities risk being entirely unheard in decisions which will, for some, affect their daily lives. I do hope that ministers will coordinate with colleagues in departments for health, transport and elsewhere to ensure that people in Frome and East Somerset can get the health services they need in the places they need them and in an affordable way.
Andrew Lewin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I say it's a real pleasure to see you back in the chair, the model of calmness and authority. And I think after the week that my party has had, then there is a virtue in stability, which I think you represent in that chair. But I'm pleased to be back in this chamber for the first time in the session of this Parliament to talk about policy and not personality, to focus on one of the biggest issues our country faces, our energy security. The decision by the United States and Israel to strike Iran on the 27th of February has seen thousands of lives lost billions expended in weaponry, a stalemate in the Strait of Hormuz, and a global energy crisis. For many countries, the situation has become very grave very quickly. In the UK, the price at the pump on the day before the strikes, petrol was £1.35 per litre, diesel was £1.43. Average prices now stand closer to £1.58 and £1.86 respectively. And while we are less reliant on the Strait of Hormuz than many countries, our exposure to the fossil fuel roller coaster that is the global market means we are being hit hard too. The choice before us is simple. Get off the fossil fuel roller coaster, accelerate our transition to green and clean energy for people and planet, or people and the planet will continue to pay the price for our reliance on gas and oil. A word on climate change. Records on global temperatures date back to 1850, and yet the past 11 years have been the 11 warmest years on record. Yeah. We must pursue the transition to clean and green energy for our political and economic security today, but for the tomorrows of all of the generations yet to come. Deputy Speaker, when it comes to embracing green technology, the public is already voting with its feet. The CEO of Octopus Energy has reported a 50% increase in demand for solar panels and a 30% uplift in demand for heat pumps within weeks of the conflict in Iran starting. This is welcome news, but the transition to green, clean and homegrown energy is not a challenge that the market alone can fix. I'm proud of the record of our Labour government in the last 2 years. 2 renewable energy auctions with bids for enough power to power 23 million homes, ending the de facto ban on onshore wind and scaling up the social housing Warm Homes Fund, including more than £6 million for Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council in my constituency, which will see more than 600 council homes retrofitted in my community. But we have to go further, and I hope the Energy Independence Bill can be a focal point for this government. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have to innovate. I was with the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister in January when he made an excellent speech on how to speed up the delivery of policy, something that so many colleagues have talked about today. He talked about learning the lessons of the vaccine task force model and applying it more universally. And I would encourage colleagues in the Department for Energy and Net Zero and the Cabinet Office to work together with this model in mind, particularly with a view to speeding up the all-important connections to our grid. We have to work, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the private sector. I'm very proud that Ocado has its national headquarters in Hatfield, and they've been in touch with me about their ambition to speed up their grid connections and the importance of an EV charging infrastructure that allows them to transition to electric vehicles. And I'm also very pleased that Mitsubishi Europe, working in Hatfield, is training gas engineers to transfer from boilers and so that their skills can be applied to working on heat pumps in the future. But most importantly of all, we have to make clear that the green transition will work for everyone in our society. And the Social Housing Warm Homes Fund is one of the single most important parts of this plan. Retrofitting the homes of people on low incomes, demonstrating beyond doubt that this is not some kind of elite project, as members on the other side of this House want us to believe. It's a project that will ultimately get bills down for people who need it most. Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Conservatives and Reform wish to cling to the fossil fuels and the global markets, it's their job to explain the cost to their constituents. But clean, green and cheap energy is the future, and this Labour government is absolutely right to be striving for energy independence. Yeah.
From after the next speaker, the time limit will be reduced to 4 minutes. Harriet Cross.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And too often we see when we debate energy in this place, it becomes tribal very quickly. You're either oil and gas or you're renewables. There's no room for nuance. We need renewables, we need nuclear, but we also need oil and gas. And many members today have spoken about the cost. The cost is one element, but supply is vitally important, because oil and gas makes up 3/4 of the energy we need every day. The energy we need in the 24 million homes who still rely on gas, the energy we need in over 500,000 businesses that need oil and gas, the oil and gas that goes into different industries such as pharmaceuticals, petrochemicals, all of these need oil and gas. So this energy independence bill assumes that just by calling it energy independence, we suddenly do not become dependent on oil and gas. That is not true, and it will not be true so far into the future because we have not developed the systems to move us away from needing oil and gas as quickly as we need to. So if we look at our nearest neighbours in Norway, who many people rightly think have their energy system done correctly. There are 5 flights a day from Aberdeen to Norway, bringing workers, skilled workers, from the oil and gas, what was capital of Europe, to Norway to work in their industry there. Norway, which has just said is going to open up 3 more existing gas fields. Norway, which has just announced a licensing round for 70 new licenses, who incentivise drilling because they recognise how important oil and gas is to their energy security. So if any member opposite would like to tell me that the Labour government in Norway, by increasing their use of oil and gas and exploiting their oil and gas in the North Sea, if that Norwegian Labour government is making Norway less energy independent by using their oil and gas, no, of course they're not. Of course they're not. It's this Labour government, the UK Labour government, who are making the UK more dependent on Norway for our gas, who we send £20 billion to for the privilege of using the same gas that is from the same North Sea, more dependent on Qatar, on America, on Mexico, where we will use our LNG, which, if we're taking the climate argument, we will liquefy, transport and regasify before using here, so it is less good for the environment. And then we come on to jobs. And I still can't understand, and I will never understand, why anyone can sit on the Labour benches and not understand the importance of protecting jobs in the oil and gas sector. And they mention new jobs in renewables, and I understand there are new jobs in renewables, but they are not coming on stream fast enough, they are not comparable, and they're not for the same skill sets. And yes, some are transferable, but loads are not. And the highly skilled people who really have secured our energy security for the last few decades, those are the ones who are really going to struggle to transfer. And if Labour want to say that they're happy to sacrifice those jobs and those livelihoods and the communities that those jobs live in, particularly in the northeast of Scotland, they can do so, because that is the message they're sending. And those skilled workers are moving abroad and taking with them the skills that will help us with our energy security and our energy independence. They talk about price a lot. And we understand that the price of oil and gas goes up and down. That's understandable. AR7 signed us up to higher prices for 20 years. For 20 years, we have committed to paying those high prices. And they are higher than what oil and gas has been for the last few years. I don't need Wales. I appreciate oil and gas is high at the moment. But it is not always high. It has been low. The minister says that's the issue. It is the issue if you look at one time horizon. Over the last few years, has oil and gas been low? The gas price has been low, the oil price has been low, and yet we still use it. So we are sacrificing jobs in Aberdeen and the northeast of Scotland. We're sacrificing our energy security just to deliver green energy, because that's all this government wants to focus on. This government should be looking at our neighbours in Norway, seeing what they're doing, seeing how they are seen as the true country which is energy independent, and seeing that they are still using their oil and gas. Still using it because they know they need it, because their energy systems, their country is not set up not to use it. UK is not either. We need it, we must use it, and we should be drilling all we can from the North Sea starting today.
Alison Hume. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the announcement of a new energy security bill in the King's Speech, which will meet our manifesto commitment not to issue licences to explore new oil and gas fields. Crucially, it will also deliver on our commitment to ban fracking. Fracking, or hydraulic fracturing, involves injecting fluid at high pressure to fracture rock and extract hydrocarbons. And in 2019, a moratorium on fracking was introduced following earthquakes linked to fracking activity at Preston New Road in Lancashire. Currently, UK legislation defines fracking based on fluid volume thresholds, 1,000 cubic metres per stage or 10,000 cubic metres in total. Madam Deputy Speaker, this leaves a legal loophole for oil and gas companies to exploit. In beautiful Birmingham, in my constituency of Scarborough and Whitby, Europa Oil and Gas has proposed extracting gas using a technique called prop and squeeze, which is hydraulic fracturing just at lower fluid volumes. This means it exists outside the fracking moratorium. In Birmingham, on the edge of the North York Moors National Park, villagers have been involved in a David and Goliath battle with Europa Oil and Gas. I'm delighted to say that North Yorkshire councillors threw out the recommendations of its officers and formally rejected the planning application. But to create indisputable clarity over fracking legislation in our country and close this loophole, any future ban must include all forms of fracking. Currently, 66 existing licences remain active. Planning applications can still proceed under current rules. If our definition of fracking remains volume-based, then we risk companies continuing to frack, just under a different name. Make no mistake, the frackers haven't given up. Following North Yorkshire Council's rejection of Europa's proposal, Europa stated they felt confident about winning an appeal against the decision. The evidence is there for the government to include small-scale fracking in our ban. A recent report published from the University of Edinburgh found that earthquakes from high-volume fracking and low-volume fracking are equally large and equally unpredictable. This means that the risk of seismicity, such as earthquakes, induced or triggered from prop and squeezes, cannot simply be ruled out. This evidence echoes findings commissioned by the then Oil and Gas Authority into Preston New Road, which also showed that seismic impacts cannot be accurately predicted regardless of fluid volume. I urge the government to use the upcoming Energy Security Bill to replace the volume-based definition with one based on intent and process and introduce a blanket prohibition on fracturing rock for hydrocarbons. All forms of fracking contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and undermine our net zero commitments, and therefore all forms of fracking need to be banned. Madam Deputy Speaker, last December I held a Westminster Hall debate on this issue, and the Minister responded, confirming that the government remains open to evidence regarding a comprehensive ban. To conclude, I would ask my honourable friend to confirm what further evidence he requires to ban small-scale fracking, unless, of course, it's earthquakes in Scarborough.
Anne Davis.
Diolch yn fawr, Madam Dirprwy Llefarydd. Energy has become one of the most important issues in Caerfyrddin and the rest of Wales in recent years. Global events have exposed how vulnerable our communities are to energy shocks. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 cost the Welsh economy £5.65 billion, averaging over £2,000 per home in Wales. And as the impact of the war in Iran intensifies, Welsh households are being hit once again. And rural households are paying hundreds more in fuel and heating oil costs, and the average on-grid household energy bill could rise by nearly £300 when the energy cap is revised in July. Off-grid customers have seen their oil and gas bills at least double over the past few months. While the measures in the... By all means.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for giving way. I just wanted to point out to her that it would be really, really helpful if the new Welsh Government could release the £3.8 million of funding that the UK Government has given to Welsh Government to help people struggling with their heating oil costs. And I'm wondering when that's actually going to be distributed.
I thank my honourable member for her question. Can I assure her that I'm sure that it will be released, but shouldn't it have been released by the previous Welsh Government when that money was put in a few months ago, with all due respect? Whilst the measures in the King's speech sets out steps to reduce energy costs, they do not get to grips with the fundamental unfairness of our system. People in Wales pay some of the highest standing charges in the UK, despite average salaries being lower than the UK average. This is unsustainable and action needs to be taken. Despite being an energy-rich nation, Wales is unable to make the most of our abundant natural wealth. This is simply due to the lack of control over them. Plaid Cymru is clear. It is for the people of Wales to control and benefit from our natural resources. This extractive economy model must cease. And money generated from our wind and sea power should be kept and shared within local communities. The Crown Estate must be devolved to Wales as it is already in Scotland. And following the Senedd election, a majority of parties in the Welsh Parliament, including the Plaid Cymru Welsh Government, are calling for devolution of the Crown Estate, as well as every single local authority in Wales. The case and democratic mandate are inarguable. We have immense natural resources, including wind and tidal power, which are not being fully utilised. And electricity generation in Wales has fallen by almost 50% since its 2016 peak, as growth in renewable capacity has not kept in pace with a drop in generation from coal and nuclear. If we are to strengthen our energy security, we need to see the government and developers working with the needs of communities to deliver investment in renewables. We need to see in a sustainable and fair way, with an emphasis on offshore wind and community-led onshore developments. And developers need to be totally transparent in costs and how their investment is being funded. The King's Speech does include the new coal licensing ban, which is welcome. However, as I've raised before in Parliament, the proposed ban in its current form does not guarantee the prevention of commercial extraction of coal from coal tips. The government should bring measures forward to close this loophole so that companies can never profit from the over 2,500 tips we have in Wales, which contain millions of tonnes of coal between them. In addition, Westminster must also provide justice for our valley and coal mining communities by fully funding the remediation of coal tips in Wales, which are the legacy of our pre-devolution industrial past. The price tag is estimated at 600 million. However, the UK government has only committed around 143 million. We needed a King's Speech that addressed the unfairness at the heart of Wales's energy system. For a country so rich in energy and potential,
here. And then I'll be at the end.
Mit Übersetzer. Was?
Nochmal?
Mit Übersetzer.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
All right, I think we're ready to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Matchday -1 press conference for the 2026 UEFA Europa League final in Istanbul for Freiburg. Joining me on stage, we have manager Julian Schuster, players Maximilian Eggstein and Christian Günther. We have simultaneous translations in English, German, and Turkish. So please ask a question in one of those languages. And finally, please state your name and media before asking a question with the microphone. What we're going to do is we're going to do the players first. So we'll take questions for the players first, and then we'll go on to the manager afterwards. Sasha, go ahead.
Ja, vielen Dank. Grüßt euch zur Sportclub-Pressekonferenz hier in Istanbul. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass ihr da seid, und wir freuen uns sehr, dass wir da sind. Und eigentlich ist alles gesagt. Wir starten mit den Fragen an Christian Günther und an Maxi Eggestein. Und wir starten mit Dennis Bayer für Sky in der 3. Reihe.
Servus zusammen. Günni, du bist jetzt schon so lange in diesem Verein, du hast so viel mit dem SC Freiburg erlebt. Gib uns mal einen Einblick in dein Seelenleben, wie es jetzt so ist, so kurz vor dem Spiel.
Ja, ich glaube, sehr, sehr besonderer Moment. Die Vorfreude ist natürlich riesengroß. Wenn man jetzt hier schon im Stadion ist, kribbelt schon, am liebsten wird man raus und das Spiel schon spielen. Jetzt werden wir gleich trainieren. Und dann morgen, ja, ist ein ganz, ganz besonderer Tag, glaube ich, für uns als Mannschaft und für den Verein. Ja, wir freuen uns einfach und wollen natürlich schlussendlich auch das Ding in die Höhe halten.
Carsten Schröter-Lorenz für den Kicker in der 3. Reihe, bitte.
Ja, Maxi, für dich sicherlich auch was Besonderes. Kannst auch gerne mal sagen, was so dieser Ort hier mit dem Stadion, man kann den Bosporus, man kann das Wasser sehen in so einer pulsierenden Metropole. Habt ihr schon irgendwie was mitbekommen? Habt ihr auf der Anfahrt irgendwelche Freiburg- oder auch Aston Villa-Fans gesehen? Was hältst du von dem Atmosphärischen? Und dann die zweite Frage, hast du am Freitagabend auch Premier League geschaut? Hast du Aston Villa selber vorbereitet und wie habt ihr sie intern jetzt mit dem Trainerstab vorbereitet? Auf was müsst ihr am meisten achten?
Ich fange mit der zweiten Frage an. Also ja, ich habe Premier League am Freitag geschaut. War ein sehr interessantes Spiel. Aston Villa, so wie man sie kennt, sehr abgezockt. Ich finde über viele Phasen einfach eine sehr erfahrene Mannschaft. Man sieht, sie haben Spieler mit individueller Klasse, sie haben auch viele Spieler, die sehr reif sind, die das Spiel sehr gut verstehen. Sie verstehen die einzelnen Phasen des Spiels sehr gut. Und da wissen wir auf jeden Fall, was morgen auf uns zukommt. Zusammen haben wir sie auch schon größtenteils, noch nicht alles, aber größtenteils vorbereitet. Ja, hat sich mit meiner eigenen Analyse gedeckt. Und ja, zur ersten Frage. Wir sind durch die Stadt angereist zum Hotel. Viele Fans schon gesehen, überwiegend Freiburg-Fans tatsächlich. Und ja, man merkt, dass in der Stadt einiges los ist. Wir sind noch nicht so lange da, aber ja, ein bisschen was haben wir gesehen. Eine sehr pulsierende Stadt und ich glaube, ein schöner Ort, um ein Finale zu spielen.
Wir machen gerne weiter.
Für beide Spieler, Roy Anklowitz, iSport, was bedeutet ein Pokalsieg morgen für Freiburg?
Es wäre der erste Titel in der Geschichte. Ich glaube, was ganz, ganz Besonderes. Ja, wir werden alles dafür tun, um ja, uns diesen Traum irgendwo zu erfüllen. Für den Verein, für die Fans, für uns selber. Ja, mit das größte Spiel, glaube ich, in der Karriere für uns.
Ja, ich kann mich nur anschließen. Also wir waren vor ein paar Jahren mal nah dran an einem Titel, haben es leider nicht geschafft. Und ja, wie Günni gesagt hat, das wäre der erste Titel für den Verein. Für viele von uns auch der erste Titel. Und man kriegt in seiner Karriere, glaube ich, nicht so häufig die Möglichkeit, einen Titel gewinnen zu können. Und deswegen ist das einmalig und die Chance wollen wir nutzen.
Für die Badische Zeitung David Weigand.
Frage an dich, Günni, und dich, Maxi. Ihr wart dabei vor ein paar Jahren, als ihr im Europaparkstadion gegen West Ham gewonnen habt. Ist es auch irgendwie ein Ansporn, dass ihr wisst, wie man mit einer englischen Mannschaft, wie man der zu begegnen hat? Und was habt ihr für Erinnerungen an diesen Sieg?
Ja, ich glaube, ich weiß nicht, ob man die Mannschaften so jetzt komplett vergleichen kann. Ich glaube, was vielleicht ähnlich ist, dass sie einem immer wieder das Gefühl geben im Spiel, ja, sie lassen einem auch mal den Ball und das stört sie wenig und können dann aus wenig viel machen und lassen nicht so viel zu. Ich glaube, das ähnelt die beiden Mannschaften ein Stück weit. Ich glaube trotzdem, dass Aston Villa individuell nochmal einen Tick mehr Qualität hat als West Ham damals. Und ich glaube, ja, die Lehre, die wir aus dem Spiel, oder wir haben öfters gegen West Ham gespielt, gezogen haben, ist einfach, dass man sich in dieser Phase des Spiels nicht aus der Ruhe bringen lässt, in jeglicher Hinsicht, wenn